Sea air moves with a slow breath. The water is bright by day and dark with a soft shine by night, spread between capes and islands like scattered beads. High above, mountains stand in long, quiet lines. Their ridges hold pockets of cloud. Their shoulders carry springs and narrow paths. In between are small valleys where olive leaves turn their pale undersides to the wind and fields lean toward the shore. Here the world offers many edges. Long beaches, stony tracks, caves that keep a cool memory, steep passes where voices echo and then fade. In such a place, journeys never run in a single straight line. We follow the shore and the stars. We move from cove to cove. We wait for a wind to soften. The islands are stepping stones across the Aegean and beyond. Each one has its own well, its own harbor, its own tale ready to be told again. The mountains shape the sky and temper the weather. Peaks gather storms and thunder speaks from above. In the hush after, people feel the presence of powers watching the slopes and the sea. A groan in the earth becomes a sign. Foam on a wave becomes a smile. A whisper in a grove becomes a story that settles into the evening and then grows. Before letters kept the lines in black upon a page, stories moved by breath and memory. A singer tuned a lyre and felt for the first note. A child at a hearth listened to words the grandparents had heard in their own turn. On winter nights in the megaron of a house, or in the open courtyards of summer, patterns of tale and answer took hold. Names were repeated slowly so they could travel. Epithets like bright-eyed and far-shooting carried weight and helped keep the shape. The singer changed a line to fit the room, and the room changed the song. From valley to valley, from island to island, the words moved with oars and with sandals. The sea was a road. The mountains were both walls and guardians. In this drift and return, the myths took on the tones of many homes. Their oldest echoes reach back into the Bronze Age, when palaces rose on Crete and strongholds lifted their gates on the mainland. In the halls at Knossos, painted dolphins swam along plaster walls, and processions wound their way through bright rooms. At Mycenae and Tiryns the stones were broad and heavy, cut to face the wind. Ships with many oars crossed from shore to shore, carrying goods and fragments of custom. We cannot hear all their voices now, yet some of their traces remain on clay tablets, where offerings were listed and names that feel familiar flicker in the lines: a lord of the sky, a shaker of the earth. The thread is thin here, but it holds, and we follow it with care. Centuries later, some of these once-sung stories were set down. We meet them in the songs called the Iliad and the Odyssey, and in the steady verses of Hesiod. We hear them in the Homeric hymns, where gods are greeted in long salutations. We find new shades in the plays shaped for crowded theaters, where choruses moved and masks smiled or wept. Painters on pottery added quiet details. A small figure on a cup shows a god with a staff, or a hero turning his head toward an unheard voice. These are our windows, and the view is shifting but clear enough to invite us in. Even so, there was never a single map. From one valley to the next, from Arcadian grass to Attic rock, traditions took different paths. A spring might belong to a local nymph in one place, and to a great god's companion in another. Names changed their accents and kept their meaning. The fabric is woven of many threads, and the weave holds. When we set our feet on this soil of story, we feel the land beneath the words. Sea lanes flicker with dawns and dusks. Mountains hold the long breath of time. And every tale, however full of later names and deeds, begins from a quiet, wondering sense that there was a first time, a beginning before beginnings. Some singers speak of a gap and a hush, others of earth rising and sky unfolding. We listen for the first stirrings of creation, and then a stillness like a wide breath, and then a soft opening. In one old telling, shaped by Hesiod's steady voice, there is chaos first, not turmoil, but a yawning space. A gap that is simply there, quiet and immense. From that hush come the first presences. Gaia, the broad earth, patient and bearing. Tartarus, far below, a depth beyond depths. And Eros, gentle desire, the quiet urge that draws things near and lets new things begin. We imagine Gaia settling like a shore that had been waiting. She does not rule. She rests and unfolds. From herself, she raises the hills, the area, lifted shoulders of land that know how to stand. From herself, she opens the sea, wide and embracing, called Pontus in the old speech, a long blue cradle for later stories. With the sea beside her, she brings forth fresh life. Old waters that know the calm of harbors, quick waters that carry bright fish, voices that will someday be called by many names, but for now are only new breaths upon the tide. From that first gap, there are other awakenings. Night and darkness, Nyx and Erebus, step softly into being. They are not fearful, only deep. They lean close to one another, and from their meeting come the bright upper air and the clear day, ether and hemera, so that dusk and dawn can learn their pattern. Night glides in, and day follows, and the world begins to know a rhythm that comforts. We imagine the first evenings, mild and uncounted, and the first mornings, pale and kind, moving in a slow exchange that will never quite end. Different singers remember the order in different ways. Some say night came before all, older than every god, and that from her alone many quiet powers walked forth. Some say ocean was the first path, circling everything, and that all springs return to him. In other secret hymns a dark egg is mentioned, cradled in night, split by time to reveal a first shining presence. Memory among poets flows and mingles, as streams do when they meet. Each voice leaves a trace, and together they make the river we follow. Yet in all these beginnings the feeling is much the same. There is no throne as yet, no scepter lifted, no mountain is claimed. The world is not ruled. It is only unfolding. Possibilities lie like seeds after soft rain. Eros moves quietly among them, loosening what is tight, drawing what is meant to touch. Gaia feels the weight and promise of land rising within her. Pontus heaves with a slow heartbeat, and shores begin to understand their line. High air clears. Deep places deepen. The first names hover like birds on a still morning, not yet startled into flight. We listen as the family of powers grows by gentleness rather than decree. Gaia and the sea share their work, and new lives take their places in the calm underwave. Night tends her long velvet road. Day lays a pale cloth upon the earth. The hills learn silence. The open sea learns distance. There is a sense of waiting that is not empty, like the pause before a loom begins to weave. In this early hush, we imagine Earth looking outward and upward, the way a field in spring seems to call for a broad sky to meet it. The air brightens, the horizon steady, and the old gap feels less alone. Something vast and sheltering is near, though it has not yet been named. The great family is waking, one by one, and the story leans toward its next breath. And then a roof comes to meet a floor. From Earth's wide body, patient and green, there rises the great arch of the sky. Gaia brings forth Uranus, the starry vault, a calm and endless shelter pricked with cool fires. Together they are the first vast pair, earth below and heaven above, adjoining so close that day and night seem to breathe in time. We imagine the world exhale, steadied by this embrace, and the hush of beginnings deepens, and then, in that nearness, children stir. They come not as fragile sparks, but as long, enduring powers. The Titans arrive first, tall presences with names that feel like shorelines and seasons. Oceanus with his circling waters, Tethys, nurse of streams, Hyperion and Thea with light and bright seeing, Ceus and Phoebe, thoughtful and pale like dawn, Themis with her straight way, and Mnemosyne with the store of memory, Rhea whose arms will one day be full, and Iapetus with the flint of craft, Crius, steady as a post, and the youngest, Kronos, careful and watchful. They stand around their parents like mountains around a plain, and their age begins to take its shape, and then more children follow, strong and strange. The Cyclopes, each with a single round eye, clear as a sunlit furnace. The 100-handers, each one a living storm of strength, with many hands to lift and hold. Their power is new and untamed, and some old tellers say that Uranus grew afraid. He tried to hold back what he had fathered. He kept some children from the light, pressed close within their mother's depths, so that Gaia felt a heavy ache. The earth groaned softly with the weight of it, and the hush of the world turned tight and narrow, and then Gaia, who endures and who imagines, shaped a plan. From within her, she formed a curved blade, hard and keen. She spoke to her children in whispers like roots moving under soil. Many drew back, uncertain. The youngest, Kronos, listened and did not turn away. With his mother's counsel in his heart, he took the blade and waited for the moment when sky bent low over earth again. What followed was the end of a harsh closeness. Kronos raised the sickle and cut the bond that bound Uranus to Gaia. There is no need for sharp edges here. It is enough to say that the rule of sky was gentled and set apart, and the world could breathe wide once more. From that parting, new stories drifted outward. Where drops fell upon the sea, foam blossomed on the water. In a far morning yet to come, Aphrodite would rise from that shining foam, a smile like warm tide along a shore. Where drops touched the land, the Erinyes awoke, stern rememberers of wrong, walking with a steady tread that keeps vows in their proper path. Some singers speak of other beings as well, but all agree that something profound had changed. The dome of heaven lifted a little higher. The starfields found their calm turning. Earth loosened her long sigh and felt her valleys unburdened, and then the old order had given way. Uranus withdrew to his ancient height, the night now wheeling free above green fields. Kronos gathered his brothers and sisters, and the Titans spread over the edges of the world like a quiet mantle. Rivers learned their beds. Mountains learned their bounds. Law, memory, and craft settled into deep places. The air of a golden stillness began to glow, soft as late afternoon on a hillside. Yet in the softness there lingered a faint shadow from the deed that opened this new age, a reminder that power and care must share the same house. The children of the first great family found their stations and their measure, the sky high and the earth at ease, and then Kronos and his sister Rhea took the high seats, and the wide world settled. Fields were said to offer grain without asking. Trees let fruit fall into open hands. Winds moved as if in kind agreement with the sea. In later ages, elders would call it a golden time, a season when care seemed light and days flowed like warm honey. The Titans governed with a broad, steady calm. Yet the faint shadow that had trailed from the old struggle did not quite fade. It lay like a cool line across the bright floor of their hall, a small reminder that even in ease, the future keeps speaking in a low voice. And then, that voice reached Kronos through a whisper of prophecy. Earth and sky, or an oracle older than temples, warned that one of his own children would rise to take his place. Change, soft but certain, gathered at the edge of his thoughts. Kronos, who had cut down his father and opened space for this peace, began to fear the turning he had himself set in motion. To hold the present as if it would last forever, he chose a hard path. Each time Rhea brought forth a child, he took the newborn into himself, swallowing hope at its first cry. Some say the first was Hestia, then Demeter and Hera, then Hades and Poseidon, their lives kept silent within his keeping. No blood, no battle, only a hush that grew heavier with each small life taken away. Rhea, gentle and strong, carried sorrow like a hidden weight, and the halls of the Titans echoed with a quiet few did not name aloud. At last, Rhea could bear it no more. She turned to the old powers for counsel. Some tell that Gaia, the patient earth, heard her and planned with her. When the time came for another birth, Rhea slipped away to the island of Crete. We imagine a mountain rising from blue water, its slopes furred with pines and sheep paths, its caves cool, dark, and safe. Some remember the cave on Mount Dicte. Others speak of Mount Ida. The caretakers of the place, sometimes called the Curetes, moved with the beat of bronze upon bronze, their shields clashing in patterned dance so that a baby's sound would not travel far. There, in the sheltering dark, Rhea brought forth the child who would be Zeus, and hope breathed again, small but bright. Amalthea watched over him. Some say she was a gentle goat with steady eyes and a warm flank. Others call her a nymph with hands sure as spring water. Either way, the child drank and slept, and the island kept his secret. The Curetes stamped and rang their arms in ritual steps, a lively curtain for the cave. Outside, the sea folded itself along the shore. Inside, a heartbeat answered the island's pulse, slow and growing, as if the rock itself lent strength to the cradle. Rhea, preparing to return, wrapped a stone as if it were a baby, swaddled and heavy with the right weight. She placed it in Kronos' hands. He did not doubt. He swallowed the stone as he had swallowed the others, and believed the danger passed. Some old stories say that stone would later be set at Delphi, worn smooth by hands and incense smoke, a quiet witness to what had been hidden and what would be revealed. Under the golden stillness of Kronos' reign, a new rhythm began beneath the horizon of sight, a tender counterbeat to the music of that age. On Crete, the child grew. Amalthea's milk made him strong, and the nymphs, whoever they were in any telling, soothed him with lulling songs. The Curetes kept their watch with measured steps. We imagine the air cool with cave breath, the ceiling glimmering with pale crystals, and a small hand beginning to reach for light. In that shy light, a murmur of thunder waited in his chest, not yet a storm, only the promise of weather to come. Time in the cave moved like clear water over stone, and then the child became a youth, and the youth learned the shape of his strength. In the quiet places of Crete, the murmur in his chest ripened into a steadier weather. We imagine nights with slow stars and a mother's low voice, mornings when the hills were pale and kind. Word by word, thought by thought, Zeus gathered resolve, not in haste, but like a long breath filling. When he was grown to his measure, he climbed from shelter toward the open world. Old wrongs did not rush him. He went to the source. Kronos, still heavy with the old fear that had driven him, ruled in a hush that hid unease. Zeus stood before him, neither child nor storm, and asked for what had been taken. Some in later days say he offered a bitter draught prepared with wise counsel, perhaps from Metis, that loosened the hold of the past. Others say the simple weight of the encounter was enough. In either telling, the sense is the same. Zeus persuaded Kronos to release his swallowed children, and the family stood together again. One by one they came back into the light. Hestia with a steady hearth's glow, Demeter with the promise of fields, Hera with the calm of a queen not yet crowned. The elder brothers too, Poseidon with sea salt in his breath, and Hades with the grave patience of the deep. The stone that had once fooled Kronos lay where it fell, a quiet token of risk and love. We imagine the first embrace of that restored circle, not loud, but sure, and the air changing around them. To keep faith with older kin, Zeus went still deeper, to where the Cyclopes and the 100-handers had been cast down in the first harshness of the world. He loosed their bonds. The one-eyed smiths turned at once to their craft, as if time itself were a furnace warming. For Zeus they forged thunder and lightning, a pair of bright twins he would learn to wield with tempered will. For Poseidon they hammered the trident, a sea spear that knew the seams of the waters. For Hades they shaped a helm that made the wearer unseen, a shadow gift for the keeper of quiet places. Sparks rose and fell like summer fireflies, and then the work was done. The 100-handers, the Centimanes, stretched their many arms and remembered the weight of stones. With the family of Olympians gathered at last, and old allies newly freed, the long struggle began. Later ages would call it the Titanomachy, the war of titans and the younger gods. We allow the clamor to soften for the night, hearing only a far-off rolling. For 10 years, say the poets, the earth knew rumbling days and watchful nights. Mountains shifted their shoulders. Valleys listened. The 100-handers stood with Zeus and hurled stones in steady arcs, a rain of rock that tilted the balance grain by grain. There was no sudden blaze of ending, only the long line of endurance drawing to a close. After years of hardship, the titans who had stood by Kronos yielded. They were cast into deep Tartarus, that lowest reach, and the 100-handers, once prisoners, became their steadfast guards. Some recount that Atlas was set at the world's edge to shoulder the sky, a living pillar between above and below. However told, a new quiet began to form. When the dust of effort settled, the brothers faced the shape of the world they had won. To keep peace among them, they drew lots. The lot of the high, bright air and the rolling thunder fell to Zeus. The blue-breathed sea and its long coasts to Poseidon. The shadowed realm beneath the earth to Hades, where boundaries are honored and oaths hold. The broad earth itself, with its mountains, rivers, and fields, remained shared among them all. We imagine the wind clearing over a high ridge, the first outlines of a house in the clouds, a place where kin might gather and law might be spoken in measured tones. Fires are kindled, seats are set, the sound of tools fades, and order settles. And then, We feel a high calm resting over bright thresholds. Mount Olympus becomes the quiet seat, where cloud and snow drift around timeless halls. The air is thin and clean. Light falls on columns that seem older than storms. Fires glow within, and a central hearth steadies the house with a gentle warmth, as if the mountain itself were breathing. Here, Zeus sat in measured strength. Not only thunder, but the steadier powers of right and custom gathered around him. We imagine a scepter laid across his knees, the eagle somewhere above the roofs, and at his side Themis, whose voice is the voice of counsel and proper ways. Closed by moves Dike, Justice, who walks among cities and returns with the scent of streets and assemblies in her hair. In this place, oaths mattered. Speech took root. A promise made with a libation poured was not a leaf to be shaken loose by any passing wind. Chroniclers tell that even the gods swore upon the dark waters of Styx. That name was a boundary so deep that any vow upon it bound the one who spoke. No chain clinked, and yet the weight was felt. Hospitality grew sacred under this roof. A wanderer at the door belonged to Zeus Xenios, the god of the guest and the host. Bread shared, water given, a place by the fire for a night. These were not only kindness. They were threads in the woven order that held gods and mortals in a single cloth. Hermes moved through these halls with quiet feet. We sensed the soft stir of air as he crossed a threshold, the gleam of a staff that calmed disputes and guided words safely from mouth to ear. He knew the stones that marked a boundary in a field, the fork in a road, the doorway where inside becomes outside. He carried messages down bright slopes and along shorelines, and when needed, he crossed the pale border toward the shadowed land and returned again, speech intact. Under his care, markets opened in the morning, treaties found their phrases, and the spaces between worlds felt joined by friendly paths. Beyond the high chairs and the hearth, another law hummed like the whir of a spindle. The Moirai, the Fates, worked with a patience that outlasted any season. One drew the thread of a life from a hidden store. One measured its length with an even hand. One brought the shears together in a final, unhurried cut. Some poets say Zeus himself could, at times, bend what was measured or argue the portion. Others leave him listening and agreeing, a ruler under whom even the ruler bows. All agree that the sisters kept their work without haste or malice, and that their rhythm was older than thunder. Under such order, places were found and kept. The seasons, the Horai, set the hinges of the sky's great gates, opening to let dawn in, closing to fold the stars. Peace stood like a calm figure in a doorway. Good order, eunomia, shared a seat with justice, and cities learned to breathe in steady patterns of law and festival. Iris, rainbow-winged, stretched a gentle bridge between sea and cloud. Sleep softened the edges of each day, and dreams, many and mild, passed in quiet files. Nymphs tended springs and trees. River gods lay along their shining courses. The Graces brought ease to feasts. Nike, Victory, waited near Zeus but did not startle the air with any shout. Around them, the greater gods held their domains without crowding one another. The sea rolling under Poseidon's watch, craft and counsel under Athena's gaze, bright measure under Apollo's care, and marriage kept by Hera with a dignity that could be both stern and protective. When quarrels rose, forms for settling them were known. When joy rose, ceremonies remembered it. Offerings had their times, and stories their proper tellings. We imagine the mountain like a heart that beat in slow, reliable strokes, and from that pulse the valleys and islands learned their pace. Above, snow curled from the ridges and drifted away. Below, fields waited for seed and safe harvest. Order did not end song. It tuned it. With halls set, gates sure, and the laws of promise and welcome holding fast, attention could turn outward, toward the wide earth and its unshaped hopes. A thought came of clay and breath, of a creature who might stand by the hearth and under the stars. And then, there was Prometheus, the one who thought ahead. A titan with a steady gaze and a patient mind. Some say he knelt by the riverbank and shaped the first humans from earth and water, the clay smooth in his careful hands. We imagine forms taking shape in the hush, faces lifting, fingers opening like small leaves. In a gentle telling, Athena bent close and breathed a fine breath, and the damp clay warmed into life. Other stories differ, as old stories do, yet the feeling remains that a thoughtful friend stood near the first rising of humankind, and then life needed a way with the gods. So at Mycone, when the shares of sacrifice were to be decided, Prometheus set 2 portions upon the ground. In one he hid the good meat beneath a rough hide. In the other he placed white bones covered by shining fat that gleamed and tempted the eye. Zeus, seeing the brightness, chose the glistening pile, and the choice became a pattern. From then on the gods received the smoke and crackle of bones wrapped in fat, and mortals kept the meat for their tables. The fire of the altar sent a savory thread upward, and the people below stayed fed and strong. And then the choice stung. The Sky Father drew back the gift of fire, and evening fell colder for a while. Prometheus watched the chill and the dim fields and felt a quiet resolve deepen. He found a hollow fennel stalk, so the old poets say, and hid a living coal within it. He carried that ember to the human camp and set light upon their hearth. Flame spread softly from bundle to bundle. Warmth moved into the night. With fire came craft. Clay could be baked into vessels, or could be coaxed into tools. Bread could be leavened and shared. Stories could last longer by the hearthside. Winter bent a little, and then there was an answer. On bright anvils Hephaestus shaped a woman from fine clay, a being made with exquisite care. Athena set her in lovely garments and taught her the weaving of close patterns. Aphrodite gave a soft grace. The seasons and graces placed flowers and gold upon her. Hermes, quick and smiling, taught a lively speech and a mind that could turn. Because she bore the gifts of many, she was called all-gifted Pandora. In some tellings, Prometheus warned his brother Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought, to accept no shining gift from Zeus. The warning was forgotten. Pandora came to the threshold with a jar whose lid sat light, and then we imagine a small hand lifting, only a little. From the jar, a wind of troubles drifted out into the wide world. Toil, weariness, the ache of sickness, the prickle of envy, the sudden bite of a harsh season. These were no longer far away. Life would now be mixed, light and shade upon the same field. Yet one thing did not flee. Hope remained within, or so the tale says. Poets differ gently on whether hope stayed shut away or stayed near to comfort. Either way, the word itself lingers like a lamp in a window at dusk, and then humans learned to live in this new balance. The hearth kept families close. Tools answered hard soil. Weaving softened homes. Ship planks grew smooth under the hand, and coastlines became known friends. At the altar, bones wrapped in fat sent their white smoke up to the high air. The laws laid earlier on the mountain held. Even loss could be met with measure and song. Even anger, when it rose among the immortals, turned toward order and time. Prometheus endured what followed with the steady dignity given to those who choose for others, and the people he favored kept their small fires alive through the years, and then, above, the great household gathered itself more quietly. Bonds were tied, and old decisions became daily custom. In that high company, a marriage would be spoken of, with all its calmer joys and storms, and then, on the high mountain, a marriage was told in gentle words. Zeus, whose thunder had settled into law, and Hera, whose gaze weighed pride and promise, sat side by side. 2 thrones stood close, 2 scepters near, sovereignty and marriage sharing one horizon. We imagine veils of cloud as garlands, and the air thin and bright around a household set to guide the world. And then the quiet work of that union began. Hera was honored as queen. Cities spoke her name with a steady dignity, trusting her care. In Argos and on Samos, in wide courts and under white columns, her festivals marked the calm rhythm of the year. Women carried her presence from girlhood to marriage, and onward to childbirth and the slow wisdom of later days. She guarded the bed and the bond. She kept watch at doorways and over gates, protector of homes, protector of the city itself. We imagine bridal veils and torches, the rustle of woven cloth, the gentle chorus of women calling on her for strength and fairness, and then the life within those walls taking its measured course. The tales do not hide that pride and jealousy lived near love. In the old stories, Zeus's wandering affections cast thin shadows over the bright halls. Hera's honor answered with a firm hand and a long memory. So it was told of Io, a maiden linked to Hera's own shrines. Io's fate moved softly through fields and across seas. Some said a sting, small and persistent, drove her on. Many speak of the watch set upon her, a guardian called Argus, whose many eyes turned and turned like slow stars. Hermes came gliding with music and soft sleep, and the eyes closed one by one, like lamps at dawn. Some say Hera, remembering faithfulness, set those eyes into the tail of the peacock, so that watchfulness would not be lost from the world, and then Io's long road bent at last toward relief. Within the marriage itself, stories of beginnings varied as songs do from one shore to another. Hephaestus, the maker, was said by some to be born of Hera alone, a child shaped from her will without a father's part. Others held that he was the son of them both. The poets do not agree, and the truth moves like mist around a hill. Yet all were certain that he was dear to craft and to patience, that he moved with a measured step, and that his hands brought beauty from fire and metal. We imagine him at a low anvil, coals breathing, shaping gifts that would mend or brighten his family's quarrels, and then the ring of his hammer fading into evening. In the great song of the Iliad, we hear the storm and the clearing. Hera favored the Argive side on the plains of Troy. Zeus held to a wider balance and frowned at her counsel. Their words rose, and for a while the air on Olympus was tight and still. Then came other evenings when peace returned. Hephaestus, kind in his careful way, moved among the high company with a cup, and laughter grew warmer around the table. Later, on Mount Ida, a veil of desire, gentle and old as spring, settled their quarreling again. The poets said a golden cloud wrapped them, hiding even their own high glances, and sleep came sweetly, and then the sky looked quiet once more. For all the discord, the peak still held. The marriage was a law and a shelter, not perfect, yet enduring. In Hera's halls, oaths were kept, and the ties between houses were braided with her name. Zeus's rule found its temper in her presence. We imagine them at dusk, the queen's diadem set straight, the king's thunder low and far away, both looking out over cities lighting their lamps, and then turning back to the business of a household from which many paths would open. From that household came children and companions whose stories touch every shore of the old world. Ares with the stern beat of the shield, Hebe with the fresh grace of youth and the pouring of welcome, Eileithyia moving softly where birth brings breath and hope, the maker at his forge, steady as a heartbeat, and from Zeus's mind alone, bright counsel waiting its hour. The family gathered, each with a gift and a burden, each ready to step forward in turn, and then, out of that waiting came a brightness like first light on a quiet shore. The tale turns to a thought within Zeus, a thought named Metis, wise counsel in soft form. He loved her, yet an old murmur warned that a child of Metis might unseat him in some far day. So he drew her into himself and swallowed her, not in rage, but in a wary wish to keep wisdom close. The records say Metis continued to advise from within, calm and clear. And then, in a time set by no clock, a pressure gathered behind his brow like thunder still held in cloud. Some say the maker at his forge came, steady as ever, called to help the king of gods. Some say a clever messenger stood near. In any telling, a blow fell that was not cruel, only necessary, and from the open crown of the sky father and daughter rose, fully formed, armored, and serene. She did not wail. She stood. Her mind was bright, her hand steady. She was Athena. We imagine her helm catching dawn, but her gaze set not on conquest, rather on measure. She favored skill over shouting, justice over fury, and courage that thinks before it moves. When wars must be waged, she cared for the plan that spares and settles, not for the wild charge that burns itself away. In streets of stone and sunlit courtyards, she walked as patron of builders and carvers, a friend to the chalk line, the angled rule, the joining of beam to beam. In rooms of warm thread and quiet talk, she guided weavers at their looms, warp and weft crossing like ordered thoughts. An owl on a city wall might be called her bird, a night watcher with patient eyes. In councils where elders weighed wrong and right, a gentler strength often seemed to sit beside them. Measured law found her a companion. A handshake to end a quarrel felt almost like her touch. She did not refuse prayer from sailors, from potters, from girls learning the first knots, from boys shaping first tools. To any hand that learned and practiced with respect, she was near. There is a story of weaving and the soft warning it carries. In Lydia, some say, lived Arachne, a mortal whose fingers flew through thread like wind through grain. Praise gathered around her, and pride rose with it. She set her skill against the goddess in a contest of cloth and image. What she wove was bold and flawless, and it showed the gods in scenes not always kind. Athena's own weaving shone with old order and the putting right of things. The ending turns in different ways in the old accounts. Some tell that Arachne, stricken with shame, sought to leave life, and Athena changed her instead, sparing her and giving her a smaller art, to weave forever in air. Others say the change came at a touch and a word, a lesson folded into thread. In all tellings the teaching is gentle but clear. Talent is a gift, and humility keeps it from hardening the heart. Athena's quiet favor reached a rocky hill above a small town that would grow great. There, a question arose about patronage and name. Poseidon, the earth shaker, came first with a stroke that split stone. Some say a salt spring welled up, a pool that tasted of the open sea. Some say a horse leapt forth, hooves ringing like distant thunder. Athena stepped forward in turn and gave an olive tree, with pale leaves that whisper in any breeze, with wood for shaping and fruit for light and food. The people chose her gift, and the city bore her name, not in defiance of the sea, but in trust of a lasting, living good. Under her guardianship the place learned to build with grace and to argue with calm. Centuries later, on the height they called the Acropolis, they raised the Parthenon, a temple of careful lines and quiet balance. Marble seemed to soften in the sun there, honoring her calm strength. In its shadow, artisans and thinkers, judges and storytellers, worked by day and rested by night, the city feeling the steadying weight of her hand. So craft and counsel took gentle root. Yet the rock still held the mark of a trident. The taste of brine lingered in the air, and somewhere beyond the headland the tides and hoofbeats of the sea began to draw near. The ridge of stone gives way to low cliffs and a strip of pale sand. A long breath comes off the water, salty and cool, and the world seems wider for it. Hoofbeats fade into the hush of surf, as if the sea itself were a great herd moving in slow rhythm along the shore. We follow that rhythm, and the mark in the rock becomes more than a memory. It becomes a sign of a brother who rules where blue depths sink away and where the ground sometimes murmurs beneath our feet and then quiets again. Poseidon is brother to Zeus, elder in some tellings, younger in others. He holds the sea in its many moods and the tremor of the earth as well. In his hand is the three-pronged spear that steadies waves and, when struck upon the ground, sends a shiver through hills and harbors. Old singers called him the shaker of the earth, the master of long shores. We imagine him not as fury, but as presence, the weight of tide that lifts and lowers a coast, the patience of swells that travel for days and arrive without haste. Horses and waves share his power. Mane and combed crest look almost the same in a certain light, and the spray at a breaker's top feels kin to the breath of a startled stallion. Some say he first gave horses to humankind, or coaxed wild speed into bridles. Others say they were always his companions, spirited and proud. So riders on the strand greeted the surf like a distant cousin, and oarsmen called him gently before they slipped their boats off wet pebbles. Seafarers honored him before a voyage. A small cup of wine poured to the shore, a wreath laid on a figurehead. At capes where cliffs climb and the winds test a sail, prayers were as steady as the light. The temple on the high promontory of the south, white against sun and cloud, looked over countless departures and returns. In Corinth, the games at the narrow isthmus were held for him, crowds, gathering where two seas reach for one another, while the god of the strait was asked to keep their crossings kind. His rivalry with Athena did not end at a single rock. In many places their gifts met and the people chose. In Athens, some remembered his sudden spring of brine and the first horse stamping the ground, while her olive promised food, oil, and shade. Elsewhere there were other contests, and sometimes he yielded, sometimes she did, and sometimes the city learned to hold both in honor. The scar in the stone above the harbor said only that both powers had once stood near, and that the shore keeps their memory without bitterness. Far to the east of those cliffs, There was a time when he and Apollo labored together. The walls of Troy rose stone by measured stone, the music of one and the strength of the other set in fair order. Yet the mortal king who had asked for this work did not give thanks. The old tales say a sea beast troubled those coasts afterward, or that the tide itself grew stern for a while. Even then, the sea remembered its own balance, and the walls remembered the hands that had set them. Along this coast, another thread ties the city to the god. Some stories call Theseus the son of Poseidon, as well as of a mortal king. Two fathers for a hero whose path ran beside coves and headlands, who knew the changeable blue and the sudden calm of inlets. In this way the people of Athens felt the sea as kin, not only as a border. The name of the water they faced and crossed came to carry the lineages of both palace and wave, and the wind at sunset smelled like a home they shared. Beneath the surface, poets placed his palace. Floors of pearl and pale metal. Columns grown of coral, draped with swaying weed. Shells the size of shields fitted into patterns like quiet stars. Gentle currents folded and unfolded through wide halls, and fish glinted like scattered coins. Amphitrite, his queen, moved with the grace of slow water. Nereids laughed softly in alcoves where the light came down in green ladders, and dolphins turned their sleek backs in doorways like friendly messengers from above. When he traveled, the sea changed color. His chariot rolled on the backs of creatures half horse and half wave, and the noise was not thunder but the soft lifting of 1,000 ripples. Where his trident touched, a harbor might open, or the ground might sigh and settle. Storms had their season, yet in most days the god kept the long pathways of water open to trade, to family, to the simple need to go and to return. Some say he set anchors beneath a wandering island, so that a mother could find a place to bring her children into the light. From certain shores, when dawn lay thin upon the sea, that island could seem to glow, a far glimmer, and a note of music almost too fine to hear, as if a golden lyre were being tuned where the horizon rests. We listen, and the waves lift and fall, and then the glimmer steadies into a shore, and the music finds a breath. We imagine a small island cupped by mild breezes, its rocks warm with sun, its palms whispering to the sea. Leto, weary from a long wandering and washed with jealous eyes, finds refuge here. Some say the island once drifted like a petal upon the water, and kind hands fixed it gently with hidden anchors so it would not slip away. Delos is the name that stays. On Delos the air grows calm, and the waves hush, and two bright lives come into the world. Some singers tell that Artemis came first, the quieter twin, and that she learned care in her first hour, standing near as her brother took his first light. Others say the births were near together, beneath a tree bending softly over them, while the sea moved in slow silver. What is agreed is the feeling of relief, and the warmth of morning, and the sound of a mother's breath easing. The island remembers. In later days, when offerings were laid upon its altars, people said a sweetness lingered in the wind, as if that beginning were always near. From that gentle start the twins walk outward, one with a golden lyre that seems to tune the daylight, one with a bow that carries the moon's hush. Apollo, bright and measure-keeping, goes in time to the folds of Parnassus. There, at Delphi, an old serpent held the place in fear and fumes. He comes young and unhurried, yet certain. He stills the ancient coil and sets the ground at ease. In gratitude or in vow, he takes the laurel as his sign, green and steady, and he takes the oracular seat. The voice of the god settles through the chasm and into the priestess, and words come like springs. Not loud, not swift, but balanced, asking listeners to weigh them as a musician weighs sound and silence. Artemis does not dwell in courts of stone. She moves where leaves begin, where paths turn to animal tracks, where clearings open pale under the moon. She is quick, but she is not harsh. In groves and on hills she is called guardian of the young, of fawns and of children, of mothers in the hour when breath grows tight and then eases again. Hunters feel her quiet measure. She loves restraint and clean skill. Her hounds lift their heads to her light. Trees seem to listen when she passes. In the first frost before dawn, and in the pearly heat before noon, her care rests on the living wild. A soft lesson is told beside their names. In proud Thebes, Niobe once counted her children and spoke of them above Leto. Numbers differ in the old poems, but the meaning does not. Pride swelled, and sorrow followed, and a house that had been loud with footsteps grew still. Some say a rock on Mount Sipylus holds Niobe's likeness, and water threads forever down her cheek. People told the tale quietly to one another, not to frighten, but to remember measure, and the way bright gifts ask for gentleness of heart. Honors rose for the twins in many places. On Delos, choruses of young voices circled the altars, their steps light, their songs learning the shape of sun and sea. At Delphi, music and contests gave thanks in the Pythian gatherings, and laurel crowns touched brows. Bows were strung and unstrung in careful rhythm. In cities by the shore and inland valleys, quiet processions moved at dusk, lamps answering the first stars, as if daytime Apollo and night-walking Artemis were meeting in a kind exchange. The two lights, one warm and one cool, shared a single road of reverence. So the lyre softens, and the hunt fades back into the leaves. We imagine fields nearby, the soil settled, the furrows steady, the year beginning its slow turn under a mother's watch. Already the air carries a hint of grain and hearth, and then we linger near the furrows, where Demeter moves with the patience of a mother who knows each clod and seed. Grain hums softly in her care. Beside her, her daughter is simply the maiden of spring, Persephone, whom some call Kore, the girl. We imagine a meadow of light flowers, the air mild, the world unaware that a change is about to pass beneath its feet. The year feels whole and unbroken, and then a hush gathers. Hades had sought Persephone as wife. Some say he asked her father's leave in quiet council. The earth opened, firm soil parting as if it, too, were a door. The lord of the underworld rose in a shadowed chariot and took her below, not with thunder, but with a finality that felt like dusk drawing over a room. The meadow closed again, and only the sweetness of trampled blossoms remained on the air. Demeter heard nothing at first, only the silence that follows a name unanswered. She took up a torch and began to wander. Night did not stop her. Day did not stop her. Across the land and along the edge of the sea she went, the flame a little sun in her hand. Some tell that Hecate, who knows the night, heard the cry, and that Helios, who sees all from his steady course, told the truth. The mother learned where her child had gone, and sorrow settled like a veil. In grief Demeter let the fields rest. Seeds stayed in their shells. Stalks stooped and would not rise. The barns emptied. Even the gods felt the thinning of offerings. She sat for a time in the human town of Eleusis, near a well where women came with gentle voices, and a household offered her a quiet seat. In that place, where compassion was given and received, she began to shape a mystery that would honor what had been lost and what might be restored. Word reached high Olympus. The world could not remain barren. A messenger was sent, the boundary crosser whose sandals never troubled the dust. Hermes went down to the still halls and spoke to Hades. A compromise was made, simple and lasting. Persephone would spend part of the year in the deep kingdom beside her solemn husband, and part beneath the open sky with her mother. Some say she had tasted a few crimson seeds, and so the bond with that realm could not be undone. However told, the seasons learned their path. When Persephone returns, Demeter smiles, and sap lifts through stem and vein. Fields green, orchards soften, and the earth breathes again. When Persephone descends, the mother remembers and grows thoughtful. Leaves fall. Grain rests in storage. The world does not end. It gathers itself. Growth and quiet alternate like a slow heartbeat, and we live by that rhythm without hurry. At Eleusis, the mother and the maiden were honored with rites kept in careful secrecy. Those who were initiated found a dignified hope for what comes after the last light, a promise not of endless feasting, but of gentler going and kinder welcome. The mysteries spoke in symbols, in shared steps and sober joy, teaching that descent and return belong to each life in measure. Many ages later the place would still be named with reverence, a memory of torches and grain and the steady comfort of belonging. Demeter did not keep her knowledge close. She chose a youth of Eleusis named Triptolemus and taught him the ways of sowing and reaping. Some say she gave him a chariot that moved above the fields as lightly as a heron's shadow. He carried seed and skill to distant valleys and islands. and crops rose where they had not before. The gift was not only food, but a pattern of seasons, a trust that after resting, the earth would answer again. So mother and daughter turn the year with their meetings and partings. We imagine a lantern on a winter night, and, later, the first whisper of barley in a mild spring wind. Sorrow is not erased. It is given company, and it learns to walk at a kinder pace. The fields shine, then sleep, and shine again, and we drift with them through the long, dependable circle, and then a foam-born smile begins to stir at the edge of the sea, a soft pull of desire drawing us onward. Out beyond the furrowed fields, the sea lifts and settles. From that soft edge, a presence rises. Some whisper that she was born from bright foam when the old order broke, carried on a shell through clear water to a quiet shore. Others say she is the daughter of Zeus and Dione, a child of sky and gentle counsel. Both stories breathe the same warmth. They lead us to islands that remember her. Cyprus with its calm coves, Cythera with its mild winds. We imagine her first footsteps leaving a fleeting shimmer on wet sand, and the air growing easy wherever she passes, and then the tide of feeling moves inward. Eros is near, the small archer with a smile that can be innocent or wise. In some tales he is her son. In others he is older than the gods themselves, the first stirring that draws one thing toward another. The Graces accompany them. Three bright companions whose names are the soft promises of joy, bloom, and radiance. Together they weave a light net of companionship, affection, attraction, harmony. We feel how these threads settle over a city, a house, or a single heart with equal care, and then a hush like spring rain slips over the leaves. Doves will above her. Myrtle and roses lean toward her path. Sailors quietly ask her to calm the strait. Brides murmur her name under a low veil. Even a sculptor's chisel can find a steadier rhythm when she is near. Desire, in her stories, is not only ablaze. It is also the slow confidence of trust, the sway of dance, the comfort of hands held after long silence. We imagine a bright girdle at her waist that carries persuasion without force, and then fires of other kinds begin to glow. She is wed to Hephaestus, the maker in bronze whose hands know patience and flame. Their home is the forge, steady as a heartbeat, where beauty is hammered out of stubborn metal. Yet the songs tell of Ares too, fierce in armor, who comes to her like a storm that forgets its own noise for a while. Love finds kinship with craft. It also tests its edges against conflict. The old poets let these strands cross. They do not settle for a single picture. They remind us that warmth and longing meet the world as it is, full of iron and of laughter, of vows and of wandering glances, and then a different kind of tenderness enters the grove. Adonis appears as a youth beloved for his grace. The stories soften when they speak his name. He hunts the gentle light between trees. A boar in the thicket brings an end that the bards do not linger on. Aphrodite's sorrow is quiet and deep. Some say a flower of fine red petals springs where his blood once touched the earth. Some say he divides the year, part with her, part below, and part in his own keeping. In each telling we feel the ache that accompanies beauty, and the way remembrance keeps returning like the seasons, and then we turn toward another island tale. On Cyprus, a carver shapes ivory until it seems to breathe. He calls no name aloud, yet his heart fills the room. At a gentle festival, the goddess hears. A small flame is added to the statue's veins. The cold, bright surface warms. Fingers answer back to the touch. It is a quiet miracle for a man and for his craft, and a reminder that longing can wake what has not yet learned to live, and then the harbors that worship her come into view. At Paphos the air smells of salt and incense. At Cythera, garlands gather in soft bundles. Lamps flutter before her stone forms. Offerings are simple. Flowers, oil, a polished mirror that returns an unguarded face. Eros may be painted nearby with a tilted bow. The Graces may step in a slow circle, hands joined. We listen as the old hymns tie together home and voyage, promise and memory. Desire is a tide that drifts through markets and temples, through courts and kitchens. It binds and it releases. It asks for care, and then it sends a message forward. For love opens doors as surely as keys do. It whispers across porches and through boundary stones. It crosses thresholds, passes between houses, bridges, and the paths that lead out past the last field. We feel the need for a friendly guide to carry such messages, to watch the crossroads with quick steps and a smile that knows both the road and the hearth, and then a light step answers. Hermes comes with the small winds that move before sunrise, the friend of roads and the voice between houses. We imagine a cap tilted against the dawn, sandals that glimmer with quickness, and a slender wand that brings quiet where it is needed. He is the swift messenger who carries one word safely to the next, and then another, guarding travelers, markets, and the breath of spoken bargains. Thresholds open under his glance. Paths draw close, then lengthen, and no one feels alone on the way. Where ways meet, there stands a simple pillar with a calm face. These are the Herms, set at crossings and at doorways. They watch in daylight and in dusk. A passerby might touch the stone for luck, hang a little garland, pour a drop of oil. Such markers say gently that this is a place to pass without fear, to pause, to trade fairly, to greet a neighbor and measure a promise by the mouth that speaks it. In the morning, the awnings of the market rise. Voices murmur like bees. Under Hermes's care, words become bridges. A nod seals the path between one hand and another. Coins change owners, but trust does not feel thinner for it. His swiftness is old, older than many songs. As a newborn, he was walking before the lullaby finished. On that first day, some tell that he found the cattle of Apollo straying and turned their hooves so the trail looked backward. Others murmur that he spirited them only a little, to see if it could balance strength. In the end, the herd was returned with a smile and a clever story. He had shaped a lyre from a small shell and bright strings, and its first notes made the air itself lean closer. Apollo heard and was eased. A brotherly accord followed. The lyre passed into the hands of the god of light, and in return Hermes received a shining wand and a place beside the roads of sky and earth. From then on, messages flew more smoothly. Rivalry thinned into laughter. The house of Olympus added a new kind of peace. Because he crosses all boundaries, he walks the last path as well. When a life grows quiet, it is often Hermes who draws near, not to judge, but to guide. We imagine his steps beside ours, unhurried, sure. The long way to Hades becomes a gentle descent when he is there. Hills soften, riverbanks widen into safe curves. He speaks low, like water over small stones, and the heart loosens its hold without fear. At the gate below he turns back, staff lifted in silent blessing, already light on the return. Mischief has a place in his stories, yet it sits beside kindness like two friends who share bread. He is the god who can untie a knot or tie one for a prank, then laugh and set all to rights. If a traveler's will catches on a hidden rock, we imagine a sudden breeze and the road clears. If two voices rise too fast in anger, the little feathers on his sandals stir, and the quarrel finds a softer word. He keeps movement smooth. He winks at rules, but only to teach them how to bend without breaking. All day his domains breathe. Couriers step lightly, their satchels warm against the side. Sailors read a shoreline and feel a friendly gust. Shepherds count heads and know the flock will stay together. In the city, stalls close at evening. The last bargains are spoken in tones that feel like good bread and a safe walk home. Hermes hears the promise and carries it to tomorrow, so it does not fade in the night. So roads are open, doorways welcome, and crossings shine a little under starlight. The messenger passes, and even the dark seems easier to pass through. Under his care, talk turns to song, feet to dancing steps, and then songs grow wilder where vines climb and drums begin. The air grows warm with a slow drum and a circle of steps. Among the vines a quiet figure moves, crowned with leaves that do not wither, carrying a staff wound with ivy, a smile like late sunlight. We imagine the god who loosens tight knots within the heart, Dionysus, whose gifts arrive like rain after heat, and whose presence asks only for balance, and gentle company, and time. Older singers tell how his beginning carried both fire and care. His mother, Semele of Thebes, welcomed Zeus, bright as the high sky. Some say jealous words drifted like smoke and made a wish turn dangerous. The flash that followed was too strong for mortal rooms. From the embers, Zeus gathered the small life not yet ready, and hid it in the safe shelter of his own side. There he carried it to term. So the child was twice born in story, first of simile, then of the thunderer, and the old poets linger over that wonder in hushed tones. Nymphs received him. A kindly elder, Silenus, taught him songs and paths and the soft handling of joy. Then the god wandered. Far, they say, to green Nyssa, and over ridges and along coasts where goats pick their way and figs ripen. Where he passed, the vine learned to climb, and the grape learned its seasons. He taught how to press the clustered fruit, and how to mix the dark wine with water, so that joy would open like a door and not burst its hinges. There was laughter, and there were calm talks at dusk. There was caution, too, held like a steady hand on a friend's shoulder. Some stories place him upon a ship seized by pirates. The mast spread leaves, the ropes became tendrils, and the sea filled with dolphins. No anger lasted in that tale, only a change of heart and a swift leap toward gentler waters. In Thebes, his mother's city, he met resistance. Pentheus, a young ruler, turned his face from the new god, and from the loosened steps of his rites. He tried to bind what was meant to be guided. He tried to forbid what was meant to be measured. The ending, told with lowered voices, speaks of confusion on a hillside and sorrow in a family. The lesson that lingers is softer than blame, welcome and restraint. The door should open, but the lamp should be lit. On many nights, women with ivy in their hair and men with shaggy laughter moved up among the pines. Maenads danced with light feet. Satyrs played pipes that sounded like springs over stones. Their quickness and their cry belonged to festival customs that kept shape and measure, and to the theater that would grow beside them. In Athens, the gods' feast gathered the city into a wide semicircle of stone set upon a slope. The chorus sang old songs that swelled like a tide. Then a single figure stepped forward and spoke, and drama began to breathe in a new way. Out of hymns to Dionysus came tragedies that considered grief with dignity, and comedies that eased it with a smile, and the playful roughness of satyr plays. The mask hid a face and showed a larger one. The chorus answered. A people heard itself and found, through the god who loosens, a gentle order for feeling. We imagine a great mixing bowl at the center of the room, cool spring water meeting dark wine. We imagine stories shared, and burdens lightened, and memories kept. Dionysus does not break what binds. He softens it, so it can be untied. Even sorrow is led to sit down and to breathe. Some say he went down once to the quiet places below and brought his mother back to starry honor. It suits him, who moves between laughter and tears, daylight and torchlight, hillsides and stages. The chorus that follows him now is soft. The torches are lowered. The night air is steady. The music settles to a hum, and we feel a path gently opening ahead as the chorus quiets and the torches dim, and then we walk with calm steps into the lands below. The path gently slopes, and the air grows cool, as if the night itself had found a deeper shade. We imagine roots overhead like dark lace, and beneath them a hush that feels old and careful. Here the earth holds a realm that is not cruel, only steady. The house of Hades lies within this quiet, where even echoes learn to step softly, and the laws that bind the living keep their shape in another tongue. Rivers thread through the dusk. The Acheron moves with a slow, unhurried pull, a boundary more than a barrier. Farther in, the Styx coils with a deeper chill, a water so solemn that even the gods, when they swear by it, dare not break their word. Along these banks we imagine a low pier of shadowed wood. Hermes, who knows every threshold, has brought companions this far many times. They wait with patience for the ferryman. Charon stands in his small craft with the poise of a long custom. His pole touches the dark water, and the boat holds steady. One by one, the newly quiet offer the coin they were given with care among the living, a small fare weighed by long tradition. He nods without drama. The river accepts its gentle crossing. No ripples hurry. No voices rise. Only the sense that a passage is being kept as it has been kept for ages. On the far shore there is a gate. Beside it sits a watchful shape with 3 calm heads and a sweep of heavy tail. Cerberus does not rage here. He observes. He remembers faces. His task is simple and certain. Those who enter do not wander back by chance, and within those walls the order of the place stays whole. Beyond the threshold a broad plain opens, not empty, not crowded, but level and pale as memory. This is the field of asphodel, where most souls drift as if in a long afternoon. The grass is light underfoot. Old friends find one another. Names become gentle. The weight of days eases and the world above releases its hold. There are places of greater brightness too. Some call them Elysium, a meadow of sweet wind and soft music where the kindly and the just, and heroes whose courage wore a quiet face, find a peace that feels like the tender heart of summer. In some tellings it lies within the realm. In others it is set apart as islands of blessed rest. The songs do not always agree, yet the feeling is the same, a reward that is not boastful but serene. Deeper still, in a distance that feels like weight, there is Tartarus, the far depths. Some poets speak of bronze gates and a drop as long as 9 days. Here old powers once bowed their heads, and heavy guilt finds a heavy stillness. The story does not linger. It only marks the shape of justice, carried to its end. In the midst of these regions stand the judges. Minos, with a king's memory. Rhadamanthys, careful and exact. Aeacus, steadfast and plain. They listen to a life as to a tale told quietly by a hearth. They weigh not the noise of a deed, but the measure of its truth. With a nod or a raised hand they guide each soul toward asphodel, or toward the shining meadows, or away into the dim depth. It is not harsh. It is certain. The same law that steadies the sky steadies this place beneath. Sometimes, song tries to soften that certainty. We remember Orpheus, whose lyre had once taught trees to lean closer. He came to these banks with grief like winter in his chest. His music crossed the water. Cerberus lowered his many heads and listened. Even the judges drew near, as if to a memory of dawn. Hades, whose heart is firm, and Persephone, who knows the tug of loss, were moved and gave a gentle rule. Take her hand, they said, and walk. Do not look back until both stand in the sun. The path rose. Footsteps counted the rises. Some say doubt touched him. Some say love did. He turned. The rule held. Eurydice faded like mist. The story remains here like a low, beautiful chord, teaching, not scolding, about patience, trust, and the quiet reach of law. So the underworld rests, not in terror, but in order. Oaths hold. Paths are kept. Rest is given in its measure. When we think of deeds to come, of names that will ring in halls and in markets, we feel how they will be weighed by this same calm balance. And then the world of shining deeds and mortal renown rises to meet us. Out of that calm weight we lift our eyes to those whose lives were told in brighter tones. The heroes step forward, not as gods, yet more than our ordinary days, larger than life and still mortal. They walk a narrow path between village hearths and divine attention, watched by neighbors, noticed by the gods. Sometimes a god is in the blood, sometimes only favor. Always a body that can tire, and a heart that can falter, and a name that can grow clear as a bell in the mind. Their stories carry a measure. Strength is praised, but not alone. Cunning that spares a life sits beside force that ends a threat. Patience is counted in the keeping of oaths. A hero may receive a god's tool, a warning in a dream, a wind that turns at the needed hour. Yet the deed never does itself. Hands must lift. Feet must travel. Voice must answer. Even blessed, they meet the limits set for mortals and return at last to the quiet law that holds all souls. The Greeks spoke of kleos, the sound a name makes after a life is done. We can imagine that sound moving like a soft tide through halls and markets, along colonnades and fields. It is fame, yet also a kind of memory with care in it. A life should be honorable in its hours, and then remembered with honor when those hours end. Many tales weigh both. The swift whose pride runs ahead pays a price. The steady who keeps faith finds a second life in song. Death does not end the measure. It reveals it. Because memory mattered, cities tended and cherished the names that guarded them. Shrines rose for heroes, not only for the great gods. A low mound, a ring of stones, a small walled court near a gate or a harbor. There, on certain evenings, people poured wine to the ground, set down honey cakes, and spoke the name as if greeting a watchful neighbor. The hero was theirs, a protector in the soil, a face in the city's mirror. In times of danger, the people called upon this presence. In peace, they thanked it for fields that ripened and ships that came home. Lineage bound the living to the dead and to the land. Families traced their roots to a founder with a bright story. Towns told of a prince who cleared the road, or a woman of strength who changed a river's course. Identities took shape around these ties. Gentle rivalries followed. One city named itself children of a certain hero and looked with wary pride across a mountain at neighbors who claimed another. Even the old bones mattered. Carried home from afar, placed in a new tomb, they shifted the felt center of a place. The past was not gone. It lived in the ground beneath the feet of the present. From these ties the measure of a hero grows clearer. Endurance matters. Courage that is not a shout, but a breath held steady. Wisdom that listens as well as speaks. The stories show what can be attempted and what must be refused. They remind us that crossing a border without care invites reproof, and that help received carries obligations in return. Some heroes stand against monsters. Some mend a wrong and then accept exile. Some return what is stolen and learn to walk more humbly. Even the bold discover boundaries. Even the favored kneel in thanks. In the end, the light on a hero's path is mortal light. A few are lifted higher, their names pressed into the sky as stars, or granted a share in a god's table. Many more find their rest in the earth they served, their Cleos carried by singers and by simple talk in quiet rooms. When the bread is broken for a festival, when runners pass a finish line, when a child asks about a statue near a gate, the past leans forward and answers. The measure continues. With this in our hands, we feel the breeze of the first bright quests. A mother's counsel in a whisper, a gift that shines like water. Footsteps toward an island where danger wears a mask no eyes should meet. And then, a young man sets his course. The name is Perseus, and the breeze at his back has been blowing since before his first breath. His mother, Danae, once sat in a quiet chamber of bronze, shut away by a father who feared a spoken doom. In that hush, a soft gleam like rain fell through the dimness. Zeus came as golden showering light, and in time a child was cradled in her arms. Fear sent mother and son to the open water in a wooden chest, yet the sea was kind. Waves bore them to an island shore, where a fisherman named Dictys lifted them into a simpler, safer day, and years began to gather like shells along the Titline. And then, a king on that island grew hard of heart. Polydectes, with a smooth word and a hidden plan, wanted Danae set apart from her son. A boast at a feast gave him his chance. "Bring me a Gorgon's head," he said, as if asking for a trinket from a market stall. It was meant to be cruel. Yet the bright ones on high had not forgotten the child of golden rain. Hermes with the quick step, and Athena of the clear gaze, came near like a thought that steadies the hand. Their counsel was gentle. Seek the old ones who know the paths. Find the gifts that make danger smaller. So we travel with him to a shore where cliffs lean together and the wind carries a sound like whispering reeds. There the Greeks keep their watch, three ancient sisters with one eye and one tooth passed between them. The old stories differ in the telling. Some say Perseus waited until the eye changed hands and held it for a moment until they spoke. Others say that the gods' nearness warmed their memories and opened their mouths. Either way, the way was learned. He heard of the needed things and where to find them, and steps turned onward. From kind nymphs came a soft leather bag to cradle a fearful prize. A cap that draws a veil over the wearer, so footsteps pass unseen. Sandals with light wings at the ankles, as if the air learned to be a road. From Hermes, a curved blade that fit a young grip. From Athena, a shield polished to the brightness of a pool at noon, where what you see is always a reflection, never the thing itself. We imagine the feel of straps tightened, the weight settled, the breath slowed. No rush, only the work before him. The Gorgon's place lay at the edge of maps, where the sound of the world grows small. Two slept on their stone beds. One, Medusa, once a maiden, now set apart by fate. The tale of how she came to wear that fear is told in different ways, and not all are kind. Perseus kept his face turned away and let the mirror of the shield be his eyes. He moved with a hunter's patience. When the moment came, the curved blade flashed like a new moon in water. Harm was kept at a distance. Terror was turned aside, and from that ending a beginning rose. Pegasus, a winged horse, shook free as if dawn itself had taken shape, and the quiet air was changed, and then, on the way home the path met another need. A shoreline, pale rock and spray, a young woman bound to the stone, Andromeda, given to pay a debt her people could no longer carry. A sea creature moved beneath the breakers, the gift of a god angered by a careless boast. Perseus did not let the wave take her. Some say he lifted the mirrored face of the Gorgon, and the creature stilled into rock. Some say the blade found its place. What remains is simple. The cords fell loose. Two families were joined. The coast kept its peace. Back on the island of his boyhood, an old wrong was made still. Polydectes and his hard court did not rise again. The head, now a thing of the gods, was carried to Athena, who set it where it would shield the just. Perseus moved on to the mainland, to games where a flying disc curved in an unlucky way, and an old man's fear proved not stronger than fate. With sorrow kept close, Perseus founded legacies among hills and clear springs. Mycenae would remember his name, and the line of the Persides would flow on like a river, until it gathered itself in a stronger figure, one who would take up labors set in a long line, and then the river of that line gathers into one wide figure, steady as an oak. Hercules, born of Zeus and Alcmene, walks into the daylight of stories with shoulders made for carrying much. Hera notices him from the first, and her regard is a hard wind. Yet other eyes are kind. Friends and guides will come to him in quiet moments. Some say Athena stands near with clear counsel. Some say Hermes smiles and smooths a path. A cousin on the throne, Eurystheus, sets him a long sequence of labors, and Heracles accepts them as a way to ease an old sorrow and make the world gentler. And then we imagine early work beneath a pale sky. In a valley where stones are warm by noon, the Nemean lion moves without fear, its hide refusing iron. Heracles studies the ground. He meets force with patience, and the roar softens into silence. He wears the skin not as a boast, but as weather against the road. At Lerna, a many-necked creature lifts and hisses from the marsh. The Lernaean hydra renews itself as quickly as harm is done. Here we hear another footstep. Iolaus, the companion and nephew, comes with help. Together they learn to seal what springs back, heat and timing turning the tide little by little, and then the reeds are quiet again. Northward the air grows bright. A deer sacred to a goddess runs with gold at its antlers and bronze at its hooves. The Ceryneian hind is swift and untouched. For a long season Heracles follows it across streams that do not feel his weight. He catches it without breaking its grace, and the goddess allows the brief borrowing to pass. Each return to Eurystheus is unhurried and plain, a man bringing back what he was asked to bring, and then another road opens. Not all trials are of tooth and horn. In the fields of Elis, the stables of Augeas hold years of quiet labor undone. Heracles thinks in long lines. He turns the courses of 2 rivers for a day, letting clean water do what hands cannot. There is argument in some accounts about reward and counting, but the flow has already washed the worry away. In a far queen's land the belt worn by Hippolyta is sought. Some tell that Hippolyta, meeting strength that does not swagger, is willing to give the girdle as a gift. Others say Hera stirs alarm and changes peace to confusion. However the voices say it, the girdle is won and carried home, and the sea grows calm behind him. The path leads still farther, toward the sunset, past the edges of old maps. The cattle of Geryon stand under a red sky. The way is long and the guardians watchful, yet step by step he brings the herd across wide spaces. Some storytellers add a kindness from the sun, a golden cup that bears him over ocean like a slow barge at dusk. Later, in orchards kept by evening light, golden apples glimmer among leaves. The Hesperides sing, and Atlas may shoulder the sky while Heracles waits in that immense pause. Or, in other tellings, he finds a gentler trick and trades the weight back with a smile. Either way, the apples are fetched, and the branches settle again. At last there is the gate below the earth. Not every task is conquest. Some are meetings. Hades sets his terms, and Heracles agrees. He brings Cerberus up gently, the threefold guardian held without hurt, a brief crossing that shows power mastered by restraint. With this, and with all the others, he has completed what Eurystheus required, and the noise of the labors fades. After hardship the air thins and clears. Fires in courtyards burn lower. Shrines rise where he once rested his club. Children grow quiet under stories of a man who lifted more than weight. Some say Hera's anger cools at last, and he finds a place among the gods. He marries Hebe, youth renewed, and his strength turns to benevolence. Travelers whisper his name before steep climbs. Athletes pour a drop for him before the run. He stands not only as a doer of deeds, but as a keeper of peace along the road. And then a different road enters our thought. In Attica, another prince is born to walk lightly through halls and over islands, thread in hand, listening for a way out. And then we come to the quiet figure of Theseus, born at treason and promised to a city he had not yet seen. His father, Aegeus of Athens, had left a sword and sandals beneath a heavy stone with a hope folded inside. When the boy was grown, he lifted the weight, took up the tokens, and chose the land road to his father's halls. It was the harder path, and that was the point. He wished, they say, not only to arrive, but to make the way gentler for those who would follow. Along that winding coast road, he met the troubles travelers feared. A man with a bronze club who boasted of iron strength. A pine bender who lashed passers-by and left them to the trees. A wild sow that rooted up fields like a storm in fur. A waylayer above a narrow shore who kicked strangers into the surf. A wrestler who forced embraces into bruises. A cruel host with a bed that fit no one. We do not linger on their ends. We imagine only that, with steadiness of hand and measure of mind, Theseus turned each danger aside, and the road began to remember safety again, and then the city came into view. In Athens, recognition took time. Some tell that a cup was lifted to lips and then set aside in time. At last the father knew the son, and the son learned the city he would one day tend. Yet before peace could settle, the sea brought a sorrowing demand. Crete's king, Minos, required from Athens a tribute of life to pay for an old wrong. Every few years, 7 youths and 7 maidens sailed to Knossos, to vanish in a house of turns that Daedalus the Maker had devised. Theseus placed himself among them, not in pride, but in a wish to end the counting of children. The ship went over the straits with black sails, a color of mourning that would matter later. In the palace of Knossos, under painted bulls and long corridors, Minos received them. There, Ariadne, the king's daughter, saw the Athenian prince and felt the tug of kinship and chance. She brought him to Daedalus, or to a quiet corner where the old craftsman's wisdom had been whispered. A coil of thread, simple and saving. Tie this at the door, and let it follow you like a memory that cannot be lost. We walk with him into the labyrinth in our thoughts. Cool stone, turning, passages, a sound that may be wind or breath. The thread unspooling with a soft whisper against the floor. At the heart, the shape of the island's anger, part man, part bull, a story given bones. In the hush that follows, the danger is laid down. Then foot by careful foot, hand over hand, the line leads back to the door, and the youths and maidens follow the same pale path, faces lifting to air and dawn. They left Crete by night, carrying more than their lives. They carried a change in the balance between islands. On a small isle on the way, the tale grows tender and uncertain. Some say Ariadne, who had chosen the thread, was left sleeping and woke to another god's gentler claim. Some say she chose to stay. Some say storms and councils parted them. The ship sailed on, and the wind kept its counsel. Home grew near. Aegeus, the king, had watched each day from a high rock above the city, searching the horizon. Theseus had promised to raise white sails if joy was coming, and to keep the black if grief returned. In the relief and weariness of rescue, he forgot. The dark sails drew near. Sorrow fell quickly, and the king went to the sea that still bears his name. Athens mourned and then gathered around the sun. As king, Theseus was remembered for joining the scattered towns of Attica into one city of many hearths. He brought councils together, set a common fire, and called festivals that reminded farmers, fishers, and craftsmen that they belonged to the same name. He is said to have shaped an Athenian way, nimble in mind and steady in law, with roads now safer and ships more willing to trust the blue distances. Through him, Athens held a thread to Crete and cast others outward across the Aegean, lines of kinship and memory that hummed like stretched cord in a soft wind. The thread leads us onward still, through harbors and over quiet swells, and then a lean ship of chosen companions will slip its moorings in search of a fleece that gleams like dawn. So the sea takes us again. Oars lift and settle. The coast of Thessaly thins to a gray line, and a lean ship cuts a quiet path. They call her Argo. Argus shaped her timbers, and some say Athena offered counsel for her making. A beam from a sacred oak, it is told, could murmur warnings when the wind fell still. Jason stands in the bow, son of Ezon, the man of one sandal and older tales, steady now beneath a sky that opens like a pale sail. And then, companions gather around him, a company chosen for skill and story. Brothers who box and tame horses, a singer whose lyre can soften weather, the helmsman who reads the path of currents like script on water, the winged-footed sons of the north wind, swift and watchful. In some lists a huntress joins them, though other tellers leave her ashore. They share bread, share rowing, share a promise. From Iolcus, they push toward a shore where an old prize hangs in branches like a small sunrise yet to break the day. We move with them across mild swells. Lemnos rises from fog, an island of women keeping their own laws. Gifts and stories pass between deck and shore, and for a time the oars are dry. Later, at the land of the Doleons, welcome turns to sorrow in a night of mistaken shadows, and grief is answered with gentle rites and the smoothing work of apology. The ship glides on, a thin cry of gulls, then the hush of prophecy. An old seer, troubled by winged tormentors, finds ease when the north wind's suns chase the harrying shapes away. In return, he tells them of a narrow place ahead, where rocks would strike together. A dove is loosed. Feathers brush stone. The crew pulls in rhythm, and the sea, for once, yields them a path. Far shores change the color of the water. Colchis rises at last, where the river cuts its own slow letter to the sea. King Eats listens and sets his price. To yoke bulls that breathe fire. To sow a field with dragon's teeth. To stand his ground when armed men rise from earth like a sudden crop. In this place the tale pauses over a quiet meeting. Medea steps into it with lamplight wisdom. Daughter of the king, keeper of rights, a mind as clear as still water. She knows herbs that keep flames from biting. She knows that a single stone, cast with care, can turn a fierce crowd against itself. Some say she speaks to the night, and the night answers. Some say her counsel alone is enough. With her guidance the bulls lower their iron heads. The earthborn fall to their own confusion and fade. One more watch remains. In a sacred grove the fleece hangs. The ram once carried Phrixus over long waters, and its gold still holds a hush. Coiled beneath the boughs a great serpent keeps watch. Here, too, the stories part. Some claim a song gentles the coil and brings sleep. Others tell of a draught that slows hot breath to a lull. Careful steps, a quiet lift. The weight of the fleece is warm in Jason's arms, and the leaves barely stir as they turn back toward the sea. The return is not a single line. It bends and pauses. In some tellings, a brother's fate casts a shade and demands cleansing. Circe, in her island house, lifts the stain and sends them on. A queen among the Phaeacians offers shelter, and marriage is spoken to steady a path. A bronze giant walks a Cretan shore, and craft undoes what force could not. Through it all, the Argo's beam whispers. Orpheus lets music float over weary hands, and tempers ease where they can. There are quarrels mended, and there are reconciliations that soften the wake. They come at last to Iolcus, where an old wrong unravels within its own walls, and the city turns uneasy eyes on the ones who brought change. The road leads them onward again, to Corinth, where memory grows heavy. Later poets lay down a sorrow here. They speak of a bond thinned by ambition, of a new marriage arranged, and of grief that strikes too near the hearth. Some older voices say the city bore the blame. Others name Medea alone. The records are uncertain, but the human cost is clear. Even in myth, choices leave shadows that time cannot quite fold away. We set the oars down for a moment and breathe with the quiet sea. The Argo's wake smooths behind us. Ahead, the coast darkens into hills, and then we turn inland toward a city once founded by a wandering Phoenician prince, where other threads will cross and hold. And then, we move inland beneath pale hills, where fields breathe out a quiet green. The road leads toward a place whose first stones remember a seafarer's search. Cadmus, a prince from across the water, came not to conquer but to find his sister, Europa. He asked the gods how to continue. Some say the oracle told him to follow a cow and rest where it lay. We imagine the slow animal setting an even pace, dew on its hide, until it sank to its knees on a rise above a spring, and there the story rooted itself. And then, at that spring, an old danger curled in the shadows. Cadmus met it with a careful courage. When the serpent lay still, he did not stride away in triumph. He paused for counsel. At the goddess's advice, he sowed the dragon's teeth into the dark soil. From the earth rose armed men like shoots after rain. The Spartoi, the sown ones. They turned their points against one another until only a few endured. 5 say some. Those survivors lowered their spears and became Cadmus's companions. Founders, not foes. A city began with that circle of dusted hands and shared breath. In time, Cadmus married Harmonia, and a necklace gleamed at the wedding, bright as a promise and as heavy as a tale that would not end too quickly. The gates and walls rose in measured rings, and Thebes settled into the land as if it had always been waiting there. And then, generations passed through doorways and across thresholds. Laius and Jocasta ruled with the unease of a prophecy lingering at the edges. A child was born under that shadow. The words that circled him were hard ones. He was carried away to be kept from harm, and harm was meant to be kept from him. Yet the path bent. Oedipus grew in another house, and when he learned a rumor of his fate, he walked out under his own will, thinking to keep those he loved safe by distance. At a crossroads shaped like a letter on the earth, a quarrel rose and fell too swiftly. Loss followed him like a quiet drumbeat as he went on toward Thebes, and then, there, a riddle waited upon a stone road. The Sphinx, half woman and half lion, made the world small for travelers. Oedipus listened to the riddle's turns and answered with a steady voice. The creature loosened from its cruel post, and the city breathed again. Gratitude raised Oedipus to the throne, and Jocasta's hand was given as part of that release. For a time Thebes prospered, and then the hidden threads were drawn through. The truth came into rooms where lamps burned low. Some say the queen left in silence. Some say the king put out the day with his own hands, so he would no longer see what had been woven. He departed in due course, and the city kept going, scarred yet standing, and then his sons, Eteocles and Polynices, faced each other across the question of rule. An agreement faltered. Anger grew its own roots. From beyond the borders came allies and banners, 7 captains at 7 gates. The old number that belonged to Thebes now turned against it. The clash was heavy, but we passed it in a hush. Brother met brother, and both fell. In the wake, a decree forbade burial for one of them. Antigone, their sister, stepped forward with a simple devotion. She believed that love and the older laws of the gods asked for a handful of earth, a covering, a word spoken for the quiet journey. She risked the anger of her city to keep that faith. The story did not give her comfort, but it gave her a place in memory. In Athens, years later, citizens would listen as choruses weighed such choices. They felt how private grief and public duty might sit uneasily together. And then, Thebes, from Cadmus's cow to Antigone's courage, holds the shape of fate and of choice. Its founders sprang from soil. Its kings rose on cleverness and fell by truth. Its daughters taught that even a fragile act can be a pillar. We walk back through its gates with a soft respect, the towers dim against the sky. The stone shuts behind us with a gentle thud, and in the hush that follows, a wind from the east begins to carry the faint murmur of a gathering fleet. And then, we drift with it to an older moment, a bright shore where sea foam folds around a wedding garland. Peleus, a mortal hero, takes Thetis, a daughter of the sea, and the gods attend with soft laughter and cups that do not empty. Music settles over the slopes, and for a while all is ease. Then a small thing, gleaming and quiet as a coin dropped in a pool, rolls among the feet. A golden apple, with a few gentle words cut into its skin for the fairest. A playful test becomes a knot of choice, and then we imagine 3 great presences led away from the feast to find a judge. Hera, serene and royal. Athena, clear-eyed and steady. Aphrodite, smiling like sunrise over calm water. Hermes guides their steps to a shepherd prince on Mount Ida, a young man who had been set aside at birth and raised among flocks. Paris listens as each offers a promise. Hera offers a scepter, and a world disciplined to his will. Athena offers victory in arms and a name that would not fade. Aphrodite offers love, the love of the most beautiful woman living under the sun. The choice is simple only to tell. In the hush of grass and wind, Paris lifts the apple and gives it to the goddess of love. A promise like a tide begins to move, and then, far to the west, in cool Sparta, Helen sits at a window with her weaving. Some songs say she is taken. Others say she goes of her own will, drawn by a beauty that answered her own. In either telling, Paris and Helen sail away together. The sea hears the splash of oars. In the palace, Menelaus returns from his road and finds a throne unshadowed by the queen. He remembers an older night when suitors crowded his father-in-law's hall, and a clever man of Ithaca advised a safeguard. All the princes of Achaea had sworn an oath. They would defend the chosen marriage, whatever storms came of it. Menelaus sends word. The oath stirs like an old trumpet raised from its case, and then Agamemnon at Mycenae gathers kings and captains. Old Nestor with long memory, swift Diomedes, the Ajaxes, tall and unbending, the friendly guide Odysseus, who first pretends madness and is found out by a simple kindness placed in the path of his plow. Achilles is sought in the house of Lycomedes, hidden among maidens, and the shine of a spear and the sound of warlike music call him out. Patroclus stands at his side. Ships are caulked and beached prows turn toward the strait. Yet the sea does not open at once. At Aulis the winds lie still, as if asleep. A seer speaks of a goddess who must be honored before sails can rise. The tale that follows is told in hushed tones. A father's heart, a daughter's name, Iphigenia. Some say the goddess took the girl away in a breath of cloud and set a deer in her place, and the altar cooled. The breeze returns. There are other delays and signs. In Mysia, a king named Telephus is wounded and later healed by the very spear that cut him, and in gratitude he guides the fleet toward the right shore. On an island, a bitter snake bite leaves Philoctetes behind with the bow of Hercules. This too will matter in the long arc ahead. Even before the first spear is cast, an embassy goes to Troy seeking the gentle answer of return and amends. Words fall softly, and then harden. The ships must move. At last, in pale dawn, sails are raised. White cloths bloom like quiet gulls over the Aegean. We imagine the rhythm of oars, the slow passing of capes, the far line of the Troad drawing near. Troy stands on its hill with towers old as stories. Some say the walls were set by Apollo and Poseidon, stones that knew the songs of gods. Priam counts his household. Hecuba lights the hearth. Hector tightens a strap. Aeneas watches the fields. Paris and Helen walk the shaded courts. Allies gather along the Scamander. On the shore, dark hulls grind into sand, and around them huts rise like a new village. Night after night the campfires of Achaea mirror the constellations, and day after day the high city holds its calm crown. The siege does not crash. It settles, patient as a slow tide around a stubborn rock, and then the shore breathes in and out. Seasons turn over the plain. In the long hush of siege, the poem that has come down to us opens only a narrow window. The Iliad lingers on a handful of weeks near the end, and turns its lantern toward honor, anger, and the slow work of making peace again, even while the walls still stand. We follow the quarrel that bends the whole line of battle. Agamemnon, high king among the Achaeans, and Achilles, swift and young and bright as a blade, fall out over wounded honor. A captive woman is taken from Achilles, and in that taking he feels his worth stripped away. He draws back from the fighting. He sits apart while the tide of war slides and breaks without him, and the ships on the beach learn how much one absence can weigh. Across the river and under the towers, Hector holds the city steady. He does not boast. He moves like a pillar set among anxious hearts. We imagine him walking the streets to calm the people, trading words with elders at the gate, lifting his son who reaches for his helmet and laughs. The balance between home and field is his daily measure. He knows the cost and goes anyway, and the wind on the rampart sighs with him. There are moments when hope gathers itself in a single combat, as if the whole quarrel might narrow to two men and then be laid down. Paris and Menelaus meet between the lines, pale dawn light on their shields. For a breath it seems the war could end if one falls. But the gods care, too, and their care is partial and human in its attachments. Aphrodite carries Paris away in a mist, and the thread of peace slips loose again. Champions face each other with restraint as well as steel. Ajax and Hector trade heavy blows until night leans in, and they pause to exchange gifts that say we are both sons, both mortals, both bound by more than this day. Farther, along the field, Diomedes and Glaucus speak and discover the old bond of guest friendship between their houses. They lower their spears and trade armor, and the story itself seems to breathe more easily for a moment. All through this, the gods and goddesses pass across the scene like weather. Hera and Athena shoulder the Achaean cause. Apollo shields the Trojans and hears their prayers. Poseidon rises when he chooses. Ares surges and subsides. They do not settle the matter. They mirror it, as if the hidden tempers of families and cities had found larger bodies and brighter faces. The ships are close to fire when another heart steps forward. Patroclus, dear to Achilles, borrows his armor and the name that the armor carries. He does not think himself the equal, only a helper, and yet courage fills him like a second breath. He steadies the Achaeans and presses the Trojans back from the burning stern posts. Then his fortune thins. Apollo's unseen hand unsettles him. Hector meets him, and the brave light in him goes out with a solemn dignity the poets do not hurry past. In that quiet lies the turn of the tale. Grief opens Achilles like a door. Anger returns, but it is washed through with love. Thetis, his mother of the sea, rises, and new armor comes from Hephaestus, a shield that holds the rounds of human life. Cities at peace and at war, plowed fields, dances, stars. Achilles goes back to the field, fast as ever, and meets Hector under the walls. The end is certain, and yet even in that certainty the story softens its gaze. Later, in a night of lamplight and careful words, old Priam comes to the Achaean huts, guided by a friendly god. He begs for his son. Achilles, remembering his own father, weeps with him. They share bread. They share a truce. Hector is carried home, and the city mourns him with the steadiness he once gave to them. So the Iliad closes, not with the fall of walls, but with the honor of rights and the feeling that anger can cool and hands can be unclenched. The long war is not yet done. Other songs tell what came after these weeks, when counsel turned to craft and the night to flame, and the great gates opened at last to cunning and to fire. And then, in the quieter tales that follow, we drift beyond the funeral fires and hear how the balance tipped. Achilles, brightest in the field, met the end that waited for him. An arrow found the one place left unguarded. Some sing that a god's hand guided it. Others simply say that fate had chosen its line. He was mourned, and his splendid armor was judged to belong to Odysseus. This gift of shining bronze deepened rifts among friends, and still the long struggle went on, turning from open force toward craft and hidden steps. And then, we imagine councils held in whisper and lamplight. A plan as strange as a dream takes shape. A hollow horse of timber, tall as a tower, its sides fitted by careful hands. Hippias is named as the builder in many tellings, yet the mind moving through the plan is Odysseus, who loves the shadowed path that leads to light. The ships are drawn away behind a nearby island, their sails furled like folded wings. A single man is left behind in the dust of the abandoned camp. He is called Sinon in later verses. He speaks with a trembling that feels true, telling of a quarrel among the Greeks, of himself offered as a victim, of the horse raised as a sacred pledge to turn the war's luck. He begs for mercy, and his story is woven to catch soft hearts. Not all are caught. A priest named Laocoon warns that gifts from the enemy can hold a bite within them. He casts a spear that quivers in the wooden flank. The tale remembers that the sea answered with a sign that hushed him, often pictured as coiling shapes from the surf, and later ages carved that hush in stone so carefully that we can almost hear his breath. The people waver. At last the horse is drawn over the threshold with songs and relief, wheels creaking, ropes pulled by many hands. The day fades. Doors are latticed. Wine is poured. On the towers, sentries blink at a quiet shore. Night deepens, and then the wood opens like a heavy lid. Men step down on tired legs and pad through lanes they have studied from a distance for so long. They lift the bars and unlatch the gates. The fleet glides back into the harbor mouth in the dark. Torches flower along walls and roofs. The city's defenses, so patient through so many seasons, fail in a single turn of ours. We do not need to linger on the breaking. We can hold instead to the small shapes of hands parting, to vows kept to the end, to the sound of names called softly in smoke. A kingdom that had stood against the world bows its head. In that ashlit hour, Aeneas wakes to a call. Some say the shade of Hector speaks to him, calm in ruin, and asks him to save what can be saved. He gathers his old father and lifts him onto his back. He takes his little son's hand. He lifts the household gods he can carry. Some lines remember a wife who follows and is lost in the turning streets, leaving a voice that promises another shore. This thread is lifted later by Roman poets, who send Aeneas through long seas to Italy, where his patience would seed new lineages. We imagine his small band moving out through a gate, not toward triumph, but toward endurance, and then, they are not alone. Survivors scatter like sparks before wind. Some are led along coasts to quiet coves where new altars rise. Some reach the Adriatic and swear by a river that feels almost familiar. Helenus and Andromache build a home among steep Epirus hills. Names from the Scamander are given to new streams and markets. A few are taken across the sea into hard futures, and even there, they keep festivals for a city made of memory. Troy becomes less a place than a carried music, sung in different harbors as the years unroll. Dawn returns to the blackened stones. Ash cools. Footsteps fade down every road. Among the Greeks who leave is the man with the bright mind and the borrowed armor. He turns his prow toward a headland where his own hearth once stood, though the miles between seem to lengthen as he looks, and then he sails first to the shores of the Cyclades, where victory tastes sharp and brief. The men take what they can and linger too long. The wind turns while the townsfolk call their neighbors. Spears glitter from distant slopes. In the rush back to the sea, hard lessons gather like clouds. We feel a first teaching of measure. Some gains are best released before they harden into loss, and then the oars dip again. The coast changes, and a soft sweetness drifts from a low island. The lotus eaters offer no harm, only a fruit that loosens every tie. Those who taste it forget the names of wives and fields. They smile gently and wish to stay. Odysseus learns to be wary of ease that erases duty. Friends are brought back to the benches with care, and the black hull slides on. A dark cave opens along another shore. Inside, cheeses rest on polished stones. There are goats and a great jar of milk. They wait for a host who does not honor guests. Polyphemus returns, fills the mouth of the cave with a rock, and turns from welcome to taking. No tale dwells here on hurt. The hard choice is told with restraint. Wine is offered, a name is hidden, a stake is heated. At dawn the flock moves out, and under the warm bellies of rams, men pass beneath the hand that searches. Only when the ship has found open water does the captain call his true name over the foam. The answer is a roar that shakes the sea, and Poseidon begins to keep a watchful wrath that will take years to quiet, and then the sails are trimmed again. With Aeolus, the winds are gathered in tide. A bag that holds storms rests beside the tiller. Home lies almost within sight, roofs like low stars. Then drowsy hope and unknowing hands loosen the knot. A shout of joy turns to the slap of sudden squalls. The ship is blown back to the island of the Windkeeper, who will not help twice. Farther on, the Laestrygonians stand on their cliffs like moving towers. Great stones fall. Many masts vanish in foam. One ship alone finds the deep channel and escapes. Into evening, Circe's house pours music over the trees. Her voice is kind and her cup is sweet. Companions become quiet swine at a touch, and then, with counsel and steadiness, they are restored. Days widen into a year of rest and skill, with the loom clicking and the fires banked low. When at last they ask the way home, Circe points not to a sunrise, but to a shore where no breeze moves. They must go down to the underworld and speak with those who know. In the land of dusk, libations darken the ground. The dead gather like leaves at a quiet ford. Tiresias leans near and gives counsel in a voice like distant water. Beware the cattle of the sun, he says. Hold to measure. The mother of the wanderer comes, and their words are soft. Old comrades speak, and great Achilles admits that glory is a cold garment, even when well woven. The living return to light with a map folded under the heart, and then their prow turns onward. They pass the sirens, whose song promises knowledge without burden. Beeswax and rope keep the captain in a listening that cannot detain the keel. Between Scylla and Charybdis the sea narrows. One side snatches, the other swallows. The choice is for the lesser harm, and it is taken with a steady jaw and eyes that do not count beyond the count that must be borne. On Thrinacia, hunger and weather test resolve. Though warned, the crew take the cattle that walk in the sun's slow circle. The sea answers with one great breaker. In its white the last timbers part, until only one man clings to drift and prayer. He drifts to Ogygia, where Calypso's island smells of cedar and rain. Some singers say 7 years pass under her kind gaze. The days are gentle, and a different home is offered. The heart, however, keeps a single compass. When Hermes brings the word, a raft is built, and the path resumes. Storms bruise and pass. Phaeacian halls receive the castaway with the old courtesies. He tells his story like a slow tide, and a ship bears him sleeping to a cove he knows by the feel of the stones. Some say the returning hull was turned to stone in sight of its harbor, and the god was a little appeased. Athena wraps him in the clothes of a beggar. He moves through his own courtyard like a memory. A son is found, and a plan is whispered. The bell hums, and the house is set right without gloating. Justice returns to the floor where grain will be scattered again. Penelope tests the tale and hears the root within it. The bed does not move, for it was grown from living olive, and morning in Ithaca feels like a long breath finally let go. At last the hearth is warm again, and then we listen for the other homes that were remade, or left unlit as their doors closed behind departing feet. Elsewhere the sea gave back weary captains, and the old harbors listened. Some doors opened to laughter and oil lamps. Some opened to silence. In Mycenae the high walls knew a step returned from long command. The songs tell of Agamemnon coming home to a house where anger had ripened in shadow. They speak softly of a bath drawn, a cloak that hid intent, and a sorrow kept in grave reserve. It is enough to say he did not sit long at his own table. Later, in the years that followed, his son Orestes would move like a reed in troubled wind, seeking a balance that would not break him, and then we imagine Orestes at altars and on dusty roads, the old powers of anger close behind. Some say he found refuge first in the hands of kin, some say at far shrines where strangers listened. At last, a city on a rock set a new measure. The elders sat, a goddess weighed the matter, and the scales settled with a gentling vote. The grim ones were asked to dwell as kindly ones. The house of Atreus found a cooler breath, and the thought of pardon took root like thyme in stony soil. And then, Menelaus and Helen did not come straight home. The wind pulled them along long edges of Africa and the shining mouths of the Nile. In Egypt, a sea-wise old one taught him which way the currents bend. Gifts were given, and the rumor of years slid away like foam. Some say that even earlier a double tale had grown, that a shadow of Helen went to Troy while the true wife waited in a foreign court. However it was, the pair found their way at last to Sparta, to a throne set low and broad. There they sat in a kind of second youth, their fame both fragile and enduring, the two of them a pair of names that aged together as fires were lit at dusk and put out again in morning. And then, Ajax had no homeward harbor, yet his name rose from waves. On Salamis his great shield was remembered in games and in quiet offerings. The other Ajax, swift and smaller, met the sea in anger. The old stories say the storm did not forget what he had done at the goddess's temple. In Locris long after, maidens walked under watchful eyes to serve at a far sanctuary, the living thread of an old apology. In such ways a people carried a story on their shoulders, and then, not every captain was lost to storms or halls of grief. Nestor reached Pylos and the wide sand where cattle move like a tide. Diomedes, in some tellings, sailed until Italian shores became familiar and friendly, and his name lingered by harbors where new towns rose. Idomeneus, it was whispered, faced a vow he could not bear to keep and wandered from Crete. Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, was said to have stood at a god's shrine and then to have fallen in a quarrel not easily told. Philoctetes came back to his slopes and the scent of resin, an archer at peace at last. Each tale kept a cadence of return or of rest. And then, even after Ithaca grew quiet, Some late songs imagined one more turn. Circe's island waited beyond the horizon, and a young man named Telegonus put out to find a father he had never met. The meeting, they say, was a mistake without malice, a last unwitting stroke that ended one line and braided another. In those tellings, Penelope and Telemachus found new paths beside a sorceress who knew the herbs of dawn. So the branch of a family bent and did not quite break, and then, across the cities and the islands, the names did not drift away. They settled into earth and stone. Mounds were tended. A cup was poured. At Mycenae, a traveler might leave a sprig for the king who did not live to grow old. At Therapne near Sparta, Menelaus and Helen were honored like steady household lights. On Salamis, Ajax kept his day. In many towns, a hero had a corner of the year, a small altar, a spring where wreaths were set afloat. Local pride and memory worked together, and the gods were never far from these remembrances. We imagine footsteps in early light, a loaf broken, a bit of honey, a whisper of thanks. The waves grow still around the old harbors, and then we turn toward the steady ways of honoring that held each day in its place. From the warm coal of the hearth, the day found its quiet shape. In many homes, a small flame for Hestia was tended with care. A few drops of wine, a piece of bread, a whisper for safe walls and gentle weather. In courtyards and beside doorways, little altars held sprigs of myrtle and olive. At crossroads, a carved pillar watched the lanes. We imagine a household pausing before a journey, a hand over the light, a soft vow, and then the door opening to the street and the life of the city beyond. Greek worship held a balance that felt steady and kind. The household kept its small rites, and the city gathered for larger ones. A temple rose with columns like trees, but it was the altar outside that met sun and rain. The god's image stood within, serene and still, while prayers and songs drifted under open sky. Processions wound uphill with garlands, bread, and wine. Barley was cast, incense lifted its thin smoke, and a share for the god was laid upon the fire. The rest became a meal that many hands prepared and many hands received. In that sharing, people felt their bonds to one another and to the god confirmed with gratitude and care, and then the music softened and the crowd thinned toward home. Across the seas and valleys, great sanctuaries gathered cities in truce and greeting. In the grove at Olympia, where Zeus was honored, runners and wrestlers waited in calm attention. Every 4 years the games returned, and the roads filled with travelers beneath the summer light. No war was to trouble their passage. A victor's crown was only leaves, yet the honor shone for a lifetime. Dedications lined the paths, small and grand, stories in bronze and stone. People met rivals and old friends, traded news, and gave thanks at the altar. The common fire of the games was a breathing thing, and then the years turned again toward the next gathering. Pilgrims also climbed the slopes of Parnassus to seek Apollo's counsel at Delphi. They washed in the cold stream, tied laurel in their hair, and offered a simple cake. Within, the Pythia took her place upon a tripod. Her voice came slow, in measured words that were shaped by priests and remembered in fragments. Some said a breath from the earth rose beneath her. Others said the gods spoke in the quiet between her phrases. The records are uncertain. What is clear is the long patience of those who waited, and the careful way they carried guidance home. Cities asked about wars, families asked about journeys and fields, and then the sacred road emptied again until the next season's steps were heard. For healing, many traveled in gentler hope to the sanctuaries of Asclepius. At Epidaurus the colonnades held a cool hush. The sick bathed, laid out a small gift, and slept in the long hall reserved for dreams. Snakes were kept there as sacred to the god, a sign of renewal and quiet watch. In the night, it was said, the god might come in a vision. Morning brought interpretations, a simple diet, a walk to the spring, maybe herbs, and a hymn. Clay models of healed limbs were left in thanks. The silence felt careful and kind, and then the path home seemed lighter beneath the feet. So the year moved between doorways and wide squares, between hearth smoke and festival torches. Sacrifices ended with blessings and farewells. Priests poured a last libation. Neighbors exchanged soft words and made their way back through familiar lanes. In some cities, as spring ripened, another kind of gathering prepared itself. For Dionysus, processions began with songs and ivy, and a hillside of stone waited for voices. The old tales would be woven with new music and measured steps. The crowd would settle as dusk eased in, and then the stories would find new voices upon the stage. Morning gathers softly on the hillside of stone. We imagine the spring air quiet over Athens, the city turning its face toward the orchestra, that round floor where feet will mark time. A flute breath threads the space. The chorus finds its place, robes moving like calm water, and a voice begins to sing of old ancestry and careful warning, of how the line of a house once rose, and how it might fall. Words we have known from fireside and harbor are lifted into measured steps. A familiar tale eases into a new shape. Aeschylus stands among the first of these shapers. We imagine his trilogies like slow-burning lamps, set one after another. In his Orestes, a home darkened by old injury is brought into the open air. Blood-owed grief becomes an argument for a different path. Athena listens. A council forms. Vengeance, long kept, is asked to settle into law. The chorus remembers the weight of old curses, and yet offers a bridge toward a civic peace, as if the city itself were learning to breathe in a larger room, and then to keep breathing. Sophocles, gentle and precise, lets a single figure hold our gaze while the world around her hums with duty and decree. Antigone stands with the memory of kin and the echo of unwritten customs. She hears the city speak with another voice. We imagine the actors' masks catching light as her choice is spoken, not shouted, and the chorus answers with care. No lesson is pushed. A space opens where the people watching, neighbors and officials and visitors, may weigh what it is to obey, and what it is to honor, and how either choice may cost, and then perhaps to carry that weight home in silence. Euripides, keen to the tremor in human speech, lifts the veil from the private heart. In Medea, a stranger in a new city speaks clearly of promises made and then unmade. The chorus of local women listens, not far, not above, feeling the tide turn. The play does not hurry. It does not spare the sorrow, yet it leaves the worst unseen, held at a respectful distance, while the people consider how exile feels, how pride frays, and how the gods may be present and yet quiet. The old story is not broken. It is turned slightly, so we notice different faces in its light, and then those faces stay with us as we rise from the benches. The chorus, always near the center, carries memory between the actors and the city. It sings of old kings and household gods. It warns and it wonders. The actors, behind carved and painted masks, bring gods and heroes into clear human focus. Gestures are simple. Voices are steady. Some say only a few actors share many roles, shifting posture and tone so that the familiar becomes freshly seen. Under the open sky, the boundary between the tale and the people who bear it feels gentle and porous, and then the wind moves through the pines above the seating, and the words seem older than any one mouth. Comedy arrives in another mood, still under the care of Dionysus. Laughter stirs the same air. A chorus might dance with brighter steps. Everyday scenes lean against divine matters, not to wound them, but to let them breathe. A god may knock at a common door. A citizen may speak to Hermes as if to a neighbor. It is playful and a little bold, yet the ground of reverence holds. The city smiles at itself, and then, by smiling, it knows itself a little more. All through these days, audience and city share the task. Patron and poet, chorus and judge, each keeps a strand. Prizes are given, but the deeper choice is quieter. What to remember? What to set aside? How to renew an old story without tearing its roots? As shadows lengthen, masts are set on pegs and torches are lifted. We walk the streets home with the murmur of songs still near. Some lines comfort, some unsettle. They ask for time. And then, as night deepens, thinkers begin to wonder softly what such tales are for, and how their meanings take shape in us. In the quiet after the stage, lamps burn low in courtyards and under painted roofs. Voices fall to murmurs. We imagine philosophers leaning on columns or walking slowly beneath trees, letting the old stories breathe a little more. Reflection slows and deepens, not to end the tales, but to ask gently how they speak and what they keep beneath their surfaces, and then some began to read the myths as veils with steady meanings stitched within. An early listener might hear Zeus and think of the broad sky, Hera of the moist air, Poseidon of the moving waters. Fire in Hephaestus, grain in Demeter. The thunder becomes a way to talk about causes in nature, not a quarrel on a cloud, but a law in the world. Others found moral maps in familiar scenes. Hercules at a crossroad, one path soft with ease and another rough with virtue, becomes a lesson quietly handed on. The stories stayed themselves while also teaching beneath their music, and then, in a grove just beyond the city, we imagine a teacher named Plato shaping questions with a careful hand. He hears poets tell of gods who deceive or do cruel things, and he wonders whether a city can be good if its songs praise such acts. He chooses to set some verses aside, yet he keeps myth close, as a way to carry thoughts beyond the reach of plain speech. He tells of a soul like a charioteer and two horses, of the long journey upward toward what is truly good. He closes a great book on justice with a tale of a soldier returning from death, a turning of the wheel and the measure of lives. Even when he draws plans for a city in words, the old shapes are there, guiding, reminding, almost singing, and then, under a painted porch, the Stoics gather in shade and sea air. They listen for a divine reason that breathes through all things. They call it a living order, a warm intelligence that holds the world together. In older names they find new lights. Zeus is not a neighbor with a thunderbolt, but the very reason glowing in fire and fate. Hera is motion in the air, Poseidon the depth and surge, Athena the clear thought that crafts and counsels. Cleanthes, in a hymn, praises Zeus as the law within the storm. Poetry and thought sit side by side like old friends who learn to share a cup. The tale keeps its garland while the meaning deepens, and then others step more warily. Travelers and historians compare what one temple says with what another remembers. A story learned at a spring on one island differs from a story told beside a mountain cave on the mainland. Herodotus repeats what he has heard, measure by measure, and sometimes smiles at the differences. Some chroniclers claim a god was once a mortal king made grand by long memory. Some offer tidy explanations for wonders, turning monsters into misunderstandings and marvels into mistranslations. Skeptical minds hold judgments loosely, noting that not all accounts agree and that the records are uncertain, and then, through all these schools, the old tales remain a common tongue. A child learns letters from Homer. An orator reaches for a line about Odysseus or a scene from Troy to steady a point. A teacher pauses, and a myth supplies an image that a room can hold in silence. Even those who doubt still speak through these stories, as if the gods and heroes form a shared room for wondering together. We imagine the city at dusk, where the theater, the porch, and the grove answer one another across the streets. The gods are close enough to converse with, distant enough to think about, and the thinking itself becomes a kind of reverence. And then, beyond the hills, roads stretch farther than before. New kings redraw maps. Ships find longer coasts, and libraries gather fresh scripts beside the old. The voices of philosophers and poets mingle in new harbors where many gods meet, and the stories begin to travel softly into wider days. And then, harbors glow at dusk, and we imagine the soft creak of ropes where many tongues share one marketplace. After the journeys of Alexander, the Greek language spreads like a gentle current, linking islands and river mouths from Egypt to distant Asia. With it go the gods and their stories, carried in the pockets of merchants, in the mouths of sailors, in small books stitched for travel. A lull of evening settles over new-founded cities, while familiar names find new homes. And then, along the Nile, a great house of learning rises by the water. In Alexandria, scrolls are gathered under one sky, old poems beside new songs, many versions resting together without haste. Scholars unroll Homer's lines and set careful marks, weighing a word here, a variant there, offering quiet notes for those who will read after them. Callimachus makes catalogues as patient as a shoreline, and others refine the text with steady hands. Some chroniclers claim that Apollonius of Rhodes once guided those shelves, though the records are uncertain, and still his poem would steer an older ship into a fresh sea. And then, the meeting of gods comes softly at first, as if in greeting. On the edge of the desert, the ram-horned Ammon and high Zeus are spoken of as one, and we hear the desert wind mingle with mountain thunder. Coins show a royal profile touched by those horns, a sign of counsel received far from the Aegean spray. In Alexandria, a new companion appears, Serapis, shaped so that Greek and Egyptian worshippers might stand together in ease. Temples raise columns and pylons in neighborly lines, and processions move with hymns that fold names together without struggle, and then art travels with the caravans. A small statue of Hercules leans on his club in a style learned from distant workshops, yet the old labor still lingers in his calm gaze. A silver coin shows Athena with a new contour to her helmet, cut by a hand that has seen other coasts. Painters lay familiar scenes upon new walls, the fall of a hero or the birth of a goddess, but the folds of cloth and the turn of a wrist belong to the fashions of these wide streets. Little terracotta figures from quiet towns hold the same myths in their poise, everyday and sacred at once, and then ships bring scholars as surely as grain. In Rhodes and Alexandria, poets revisit the seas of their ancestors and trace them with careful light. Apollonius tells again of Jason and the Argo, yet adds the taste of spray and the naming of distant harbors, the slow bend of a river's mouth, the stars that guide or in the night. The voyage breathes with maps and measures, and the old winds feel new upon the skin. The sea remains the same sea, but the way of telling grows fine-grained, attentive, and kind to detail. And then, across leagues of plain and mountain, inscriptions begin to speak in shared phrases. In Bactrian towns, a god may wear a Greek name on a local altar, and a local guardian may share a precinct with Hermes by the gates. In Antioch, in Seleucia, in cities set where caravans rest, stories trade gifts. A sun lord greets Helios, a mother goddess nods to Demeter, and the years make room for more than one face of care. Where traders pause, they set a small stele or hang a charm, and two traditions listen to each other in the evening hush, and then libraries multiply. In Pergamon, careful copyists lay out lines, while in Alexandria commentators return to a single verse again and again, the way a tide returns to a favorite shore. Margins fill with soft arguments and reconciliations. A child of this age can hear the same story in several tones, one learned in the square, another in the school, a third in a sanctuary at harvest time. The variety does not unsettle. It settles, like silt, deepening the riverbed in which the myths continue to flow, and then, from the delta to the Indus, from island stoas to inland halls, the gods walk beside traders and teachers. They take on new epithets and keep their old ones close. They ride on coins, stand in porticos, and whisper in libraries where lamps burn late. And across the sea to the west, another people hears these names more often, tries their sounds on the tongue, weighs their stories against their own hearth gods. The night gathers along the Italian shore, and the listening grows, and then, in the hush before daybreak, the Latin tongue shapes new sounds. Traders from the Greek cities of the south bring stories along with olive oil and fine bowls, and the Romans, steady and practical, begin to set each tale in their own careful order. They say, with a nod, that the thunderer on Olympus is their sky father, so Zeus becomes Jupiter. Hera's stately care feels like Juno's, wife of the chief god and guardian of marriage. The long surge of the sea belongs to Neptune, whom the Greeks have called Poseidon. Names shift on the wind, yet the temper of each power remains, and then, old spirits are not set aside. The doorway still keeps Janus. The hearth still keeps Vesta. Mars stands not only for battle, but also for fields and boundaries at the edge of town. Saturn holds his midwinter feast, but around them gathers a company that sounds familiar and strange at once. Athena takes on the Roman craft and state as Minerva. Hermes quickens into Mercury. Aphrodite blooms as Venus. Artemis moves in the cool shade as Diana. Hephaestus glows as Vulcan. Demeter feeds the city as Ceres. Hades keeps the quiet below as Pluto. Some chroniclers match and rematch the lesser names, while the people, patient and curious, try each on the tongue until it feels at home, and then a poet in a new Augustan age lifts a lamp and guides the city through a noble past. Virgil sings the Aeneid, a long voyage from the ashes of Troy to the green banks of the Tiber. We imagine Aeneas in the smoke and twilight, carrying his father and the little household gods, the Penates, who are both Greek in memory and Roman in duty. The poem bends sorrow into purpose. It shows a shield where future deeds gleam and a city that will keep law and measure. In its soft grandeur, it teaches a people how to walk forward with the weight of history balanced by hope. And then, another poet, lighter in step yet deep in craft, gathers the older tales and lets them flow together. Ovid shapes the Metamorphoses, a river of change where Daphne becomes Laurel, where Io wanders, where Orpheus sings and listens, where stones become people and people become stars. Greek stories enter Latin verse and pass from mouth to mouth. The poem amuses, instructs, and lingers in the schools where boys trace hexameters and learn how the world might turn from one form to another and still keep a thread. And then, in the Forum and along the hills, Roman worship adopts Greek grace while keeping Roman dignity. Temples rise with clear lines, columns borrowed from Ionian shores set upon tall Roman platforms. Priests draw their bordered garments over the head and speak with measured care. Calendars of festivals are carved in stone. Processions move with flutes and quiet order. In homes, little shrines glow for Laras and Penates, even as statues of Minerva or Venus stand in courtyards. The theater offers plays in Greek shapes and Latin words, and pantomimes tell old myths with a dancer's hand. And then, across the provinces, twin traditions live side by side. In Britain, warm springs honor Sulis Minerva. In Gaul, Mars shares titles with local guardians. In Egypt, Isis and Serapis fill grand halls while Jupiter's eagle gleams on standards. In Asia Minor, Artemis of Ephesus keeps her many-breasted bounty while Diana of the Hunt is praised at Rome. Inscriptions speak in two languages on a single stone. Teachers travel with scrolls. Sailors bring little images from port to port. The empire becomes a wide school and a gentle theater, where Greek and Roman forms teach and entertain together beneath many skies. And then, names have shifted, yet meanings have endured. Thunder still assures the covenant between heaven and city. Sea and harvest still claim their seasons. Love and craft, law and song, all keep their places, told now in Latin as well as in the Old Greek. Statues hold their poses in basilicas and baths. Poems are copied by quiet hands. Children listen and learn the names in whatever order their elders prefer. The stories settle into their Roman rooms and rest. And then, as new ages and new faiths begin to rise, they breathe softly on in memory. And then, they drift into quieter corners. In new sanctuaries and under altered roofs, other prayers take the air, yet the old names remain where lessons are recited and where artists practice their hands. In schools, a boy stumbles through a line of Homer or a tale from Ovid, corrected with a smile. In the homes of the learned, a host is praised as a new Phaeacian, or a speaker is likened to wise Athena. The language of myth lingers in metaphors and in easy comparisons, a shorthand among scholars. In painted rooms and carved lintels, a nymph still leans on a spring, and a messenger still lifts winged sandals. And then, to the east, the long life of Byzantium carries the Greek tongue like a steady lamp. We imagine a scribe in Constantinople, bent over a smooth page, copying the Iliad with small dark letters, while in the margins another hand glosses an old word. Tragedies are recopied, hymns preserved, and vast collections gathered that explain gods and heroes with patience. Some of what we know survives because these careful eyes did not tire. The stories are sometimes softened into moral examples, sometimes read with a Christian key, yet the names and scenes endure. In palaces and monasteries, teachers quote Euripides and the philosophers side by side, and the thread holds. And then, across deserts and river plains, another chain of memory forms. In Baghdad, in Damascus, in Cordoba, translators bring Greek into Syriac and Arabic with skill and care. Much of what travels is science and philosophy, yet myth shadows these texts. The figure of Alexander wanders into new romances. Ancient authors are named with respect. A few poets speak of the old gods as the Greeks once did, as emblems of planets and arts. Through these hands, the wisdom of Greece crosses languages and keeps its pulse. Centuries later, many pages will return west by this route, carrying with them a memory of Olympus that never fully went dark. And then, In medieval Europe, the Latin West remembers in fragments and allegories. A monk copies Virgil for grammar and style and pauses at a tale of Aeneas among shades. Ovid's changes of form become moral mirrors. A pearl of story slides into a sermon, where Orpheus is praised for gentle music that conquers wild hearts. And some say this music hints at a higher shepherd. Translators render the ancient tales into French, into English, into other tongues of daily use. Dante walks through his three realms, guided by reason and grace. Yet he bows to the poets of old and grants their characters a grave and thoughtful place. The names never vanish. They are folded into tapestries and carved into capitals, their meanings reread and retold. And then, the Renaissance turns a bright face toward Greece again. Refugee scholars arrive with precious manuscripts after hard journeys. In Florence, a new teacher opens a Greek grammar and the room leans forward. Printers set strange letters in rows and release small volumes that travel in saddlebags and sleeves. Painters study the human form with a clarity that recalls the islands and coasts. Botticelli's shell bears a foam-born figure back into light. Sculptors cast bronze and carve marble where Hermes and Persephone step once more. Poets try their voices on old meters and shapes. They seek original words and read them with fresh wonder. And then, the Enlightenment keeps the myths in salons and studies, measured and admired. Translators give Homer new vowels and steady rhythms. Dramatists set classical stories on modern stages, polished and spare. Scholars praise the calm and balance they find in marbles from old temples. Then the Romantics arrive with softer lanterns and deeper tides of feeling. A young poet dreams with Endymion. Another frees Prometheus from his rock and makes him a figure of hope. Across languages, heroes and nymphs are reimagined with tenderness, their trials turned toward the inner life of the heart. The gods become symbols, companions, questions, and songs. The myths breathe with us again, different and the same. And then, through all these ages, the thread of memory is never quite broken. It stretches across classrooms and cloisters, across markets and courts, across workshops and studios. It is knotted at times, and at times worn thin, yet it holds. We imagine the many hands that have touched it, the many eyes that have followed it, the many voices that have repeated a name until it felt familiar once more. And so, as we listen to these late echoes and quiet survivals, we turn gently toward the ways we know what we know, the ink and stone and shard that carry the ancient song onward. And then, we let our eyes rest on small things that have traveled far. A curved shard, a thin line of a spear, a fold of painted cloth. From such pieces, we learn to hear again. On black figure pottery, the figures stand in gleaming silhouette, details cut with a sharp tool like whispers drawn through night. On red figure vases, the world turns inside out, and the warm clay becomes the skin of gods and heroes, their fingers, eyes, and braided hair carried by fine brush lines. These cups and craters hold scenes of Hermes leaning on his staff, of Athena steady before a hero, of Dionysus with a quiet vine. They keep the ancient song in durable earth, and the detail is often so gentle and exact that we imagine the small choices of the painter, the breath held before a line, and then another line after that, until the story settles on the curve of a bowl and waits. Some of these vessels were signed, proud hands telling us a name, and some traveled from Kills in Attica to distant tables, where guests reclined and watched the images circle the wine. The shapes themselves help us read. A kylix for toasts and laughter. A lekythos for oil and mourning. A hydria for water, with Hercules halting mid-stride across its shoulder. In the handles and rims, in borders of ivy or key pattern, we find the rhythm of a culture at ease with its stories, and in small scratches and kiln marks, we feel the work of real lives, and then we begin to see patterns where there were only fragments. Stone keeps memory too. Temples rise and endure, not as finished sentences, but as strong clauses of thought. At Paestum in the soft light of the western sea, honey-colored columns stand broad and patient, a lasting trace of worship and civic pride carried to another shore. On the Acropolis, marble lifts toward a clear sky, pediments and friezes once filled with horses and gods, Athena born, processions moving in quiet file. At Bassae, high among slopes and wind, a sanctuary to Apollo keeps its long shadows and refined lines, a place where an inner frieze once wound like a wrapped tale. These stones do not shout. They keep faith with measure and proportion, and in their ruins we hear steps, libations poured, the simple murmur of a city honoring what it holds dear, and then we read the earth around them for further clues. Inscriptions speak in a modest voice, names cut with care, gifts recorded, laws and calendars set down for all to share. Small dedications multiply the chorus. A bronze tripod, a clay figurine, a painted plaque hung in thanks. A child's curl of hair left for a goddess. A simple pin fixed in a wooden post. Household shrines add their daily warmth. A shelf by the hearth for Hestia, a small altar in a courtyard, a sprig of bay, a cup of wine poured to the boundary god at the doorway. Beyond grand monuments, these quiet acts show a steady piety woven into the hours, and then the texture of private life joins the public stone. Words travel along other paths. In the margins of old manuscripts, scholia explain what once was obvious, and lexica gather the meanings of rare and ancient terms, guiding us through puzzles left by time. From the dry sands of Egypt, papyrus fragments arrive with lost lines of hymns and plays, a single epithet restored, a metaphor clarified, a voice returning after centuries of hush. Some lines are broken, some uncertain, yet they widen the circle of what we can know, and then scholarship leans closer to listen. Archaeology and philology walk together, patient companions. One bends to the ground with trowel and brush. The other bends to the page, counting syllables, weighing a word. Layer by layer, context forms. A shard fits a shoulder. A metope speaks with a vase. A gloss in the margin opens a scene on a cup. No single piece is enough, but the cadence emerges as more are set side by side, and then the song, though incomplete, can be carried. In this way, shards become patterns and voices return. We follow them gently until objects open into places, and the living landscapes of Greece lend their hush to the tales, and then we find the ridgelines waiting. A mountain keeps the hush of ages better than a tablet does. Olympus rises with its long shoulders and sudden ravines, and even in late summer it gathers snow in its high folds. Clouds braid along the crest, and old villagers once watched those vales with quiet respect. The tales say the heights were a household for the gods. Some poets heard laughter, some only thunder kept at a distance. Yet the white crown endures, and the thought of a court above weather lingers. And then, southwest, Parnassus looks down on Delphi. Terraces cling to its flank like careful steps. The laurel groves move with a slow sound in the afternoon wind. The Castalian spring runs clear beside the road. Pilgrims washed their hands and touched cool stone before climbing toward the temple. Some chroniclers speak of a breath from the earth in a cleft below. Others say the trance of the priestess came from rhythm and chant and the press of many hopes. However it was, the laurel was Apollo's sign. Branches were carried, crowns were woven, and a hush fell when the god was thought to speak. And then, islands make their own kind of memory. Delos is a small rock set among many, yet it holds a bright song. Leto, searching for a place to bear her children, found rest there, so the poets say. Some tell that the island once wandered and that Zeus anchored it with kindness. On its shore the twins are forever young. Apollo's light and Artemis's silence live in the hymns kept by the waves. Drums and flutes once moved along the sacred way, and the island's plain stones carried the sound lightly. And then, a different sea wind folds around Cyprus and Cythera. Along these shores, soft foam gathers in hollows of rock. Sailors learned to name the current and the breeze, but they also told of a smile rising from the water. Aphrodite found gentle arrival here. At Paphos and on the smaller island to the west, flowers and incense made a path for her. The scent of resin and sea salt blurred together. Over many centuries those beaches kept the mood of welcome and desire, quiet and bright. And then, Crete carries deeper caves and broad plateaus. On the Lassithae plain the winds turn wheels, and below Mount Dicta chamber opens into the cool. Local memory holds that Rhea came here in need, and that the child Zeus lay hidden among dripping stone. Some stories speak of the Curetes beating time on their shields to cover his cries. Others keep only the goat who gave milk and the bees who came and went. The same island keeps another cave high on Ida, and each valley has its own certainty about where the infant lay. The records are gentle about who is right. The feeling is what remains. A mother, a refuge, a mountain keeping a promise, and then springs and groves tied myth to the pulse of weather. The oak at Dodona learned to speak in wind and leaf, so the priests believed. On Helicon, Pegasus struck the rock and left the clear basin of Hippocrene, a gift for the muses, as singers said. In summer the Etesian winds hurried down the Aegean, and harbors filled with masts turned toward known capes. Shrines watched the routes. A white temple on a headland made a sign for ships and a home for Poseidon's gaze. Seasons had their places too. Fields near Eleusis marked the turn of the year with candles and grain, and in orchards beyond Attica the first blossom felt like a return, and then, through all of this walked the patient feet of visitors. Pilgrims came with a question or a vow. Farmers came at festival time. Rulers sent gifts. In a later age, scholars with notebooks traced the paths, and travelers made sketches by moonlight. A man named Pausanias took down what he heard and what he saw, steady as a survey of memory. Centuries changed the roofs and the roads, yet the names stayed near the ground. We can imagine a stranger resting by a fountain and finding an old story in the taste of the water, and then mountains, springs, and islands keep the breath of these tales. The snow, the laurel, the foam, the cave, and the wind all carry meanings that gather and fold. From them we turn gently back toward the heart of the myths, where their quiet threads lie side by side and wait for our hands. And then we begin to feel the patterns that run through them like slender cords. There is measure, and there is the step beyond it. The old word is hubris, a swelling past the calm line that keeps balance. We think of Niobe, counting her children as though number alone could lift her above the gods. Her joy rose too high, and the answer was a hush that fell over her house. Some tellers say she became stone on a distant slope, tears still threading its face when the rains begin, and then, in Thebes another kind of overstepping appears. Pentheus stands against the god of loosening, denying the wild joy and the sober law that hold each other in balance. The story ends quietly in woods where kin do not know kin. It is told softly as a warning without heat, a reminder that measure helps a city breathe, and then another thread is older than gates or crowns. Xenia, the law of welcoming, moves from mountainside huts to royal halls with the same steady light. Two travelers knock at a poor door. An old couple share their last bit of comfort, and the simple table becomes a shrine of kindness. Their names are given as Baucis and Philemon, and the reward is not gold, but being rooted together as two trees, leaves touching in the same wind. Far away, bright-roofed halls open to a salt-stung stranger who kneels at the hearth. A king hears his story, offers food, a bath, a seat of honor, then gifts for the road. Zeus, as guardian of strangers, watches these moments. Where welcome fails, as in the dim cave of a one-eyed shepherd who knows no guest law, the tale grows rough, and then prophecy presses forward as well, a murmur from laurel and tripod, from birds and dreams. Yet within the press, character steps in and gives tone. Oedipus tries to turn aside the words given at his birth, only to meet them on the very road he chose. Later, gentler choices shape his end, and the air around him becomes still. Achilles lives under a bright fork in the path. He knows the two futures laid out for him and walks with open eyes toward the shorter one, his name carried by song rather than time. A Lydian king hears what he hopes to hear and learns that oracles ask for patience as well as cleverness. The fates spin and measure and cut, but the way each life sounds between their fingers belongs to the heart that answers. And then, transformation moves like a quiet tide through these stories. Love, fear, and sorrow shift bodies and names. Daphne runs from desire and becomes laurel, rooted and green, a calm crown for poets and for those who win in honest games. A nymph's breath becomes the reed that sings when held to the mouth, and a girl's grief rises at dusk as a nightingale's thread of sound. Niobe's tears, again, are a rock's slow weeping. Io wanders the earth in a changed form, washed by many eyes, and later stands upright again, honored in new lands. A boy's self-regard settles into a flower by water's edge. Change in these tales is not only loss, but a way the world remembers feeling, and then the line between mortal and divine lies close. It is crossed by prayer at dawn, by a shared cup, by the hush of a festival night. A dream can carry a god's footfall to a quiet bed. In healing sanctuaries, people sleep on soft skins and wake with a remedy brought in sleep's language. In the swirl of dancers and the thrum of drums, a presence stands near without thunder. A traveler meets a stranger on the road and later wonders who it was. Feast days, processions, and simple libations make bridges that many feet can cross. The gods, too, wander, hidden in dust or sunlight, testing doors, measuring hearts, and then these threads touch and overlap. Measure keeps pride from climbing too high. Welcome opens the door that pride would close. Prophecy moves like a steady river, while choice steers small boats upon it. Change marks where feeling has been. Prayer and festival keep nearness alive. Woven together, they make a cloth that warmed old rooms and can still warm ours. We carry the feel of it into the quiet of today, and then we listen for these myths in the arts and words now around us. And then we hear old names spoken in new accents, set softly into rooms they have never known before. Poets lean close to Persephone and let her tell the winter from her own side. Penelope counts the long nights again, but with a steadier voice that notices every stitch. Novelists follow Achilles and Briseis through quieter corridors of feeling. A playwright brings Eurydice back to the sound of water and the murmur of memory. We sense how the tales bend without breaking, and how each age listens for the note it most needs. And then, in galleries, the gods return in light and shade. Athena stands calm in a painted hall, a hand on a centaur's mane, her wisdom set against wildness for new eyes. Hermes lifts from a sculpted breeze, a foot barely touching the ground, as if errands never end. Venus rises from a shell and sea foam, carried into a city of red roofs and bells, while another century gives her a clearer gaze and marble shoulders. A young shepherd plays beside a sleeping nymph on a canvas that traveled far from the Mediterranean, and a modern studio reimagines the Minotaur as a shadow of the self. Bronze and stone, pigment and charcoal, let the figures breathe again. They step down from pediments and enter living rooms and quiet museums where we wander slowly. And then, music keeps the thread. A singer in an early theater calls to Eurydice and waits before turning. Centuries pass, and another composer hears Ariadne alone on an island of sound, her patience shaped into strings and woodwinds. A chorus names the old griefs of a royal house, and then falls to hush. Dancers draw Apollo's clean lines with arms and ankles. A long symphony gathers sea winds for Odysseus. In smaller rooms, a single guitar hums a lullaby that could have been sung by Hercules at a hearth between labors. On a screen, a road story follows a wandering man across counties and fields, a wry nod to a king of Ithaca. On a stage of dark water and simple boards, metamorphoses arrive like ripples, one story passing into another with gentle surprise, and then schools and libraries keep Homer and Hesiod near. The spines rest together, old and new. We open a sound that was carried by rhapsodes under starlight, now shaped by translators who bring fresh clarity and care. The cadences change a little. The journeys do not. New versions find the warmth of campfires and the salt of harbors, and they carry them into classrooms, book clubs, and buses where students underline words and quietly smile at a turn of phrase. A teacher reads a few lines aloud, and the room settles as if listening across time. We feel how the poems welcome each ear without closing the old doorways, and then the stories adapt like rivers that keep their source. Details shift, emphases slide, names return with altered light. Yet the calm center holds. Hospitality still matters. Pride still leans toward a fall and learns. Courage still threads the maze with patience and help. A god may arrive in a stranger's shape, and a promise may yet ask to be kept. We find guidance rather than rules. We find reflection more than decree. We find ourselves a little, and then old names rest easily in new rooms. They wait on bookshelves and in playlists, on sketches tacked to studio walls, in scripts with ink smudges and coffee rings. They look out from street murals and classroom posters. They sit at our own tables when we speak of journeys and homecomings, of friendship and trust, of harvest and winter, and the way music can open a door. We imagine a quiet theater at dusk. We imagine a library light left on. We imagine a small child asking about a constellation and hearing a story with the weight of many years and the softness of tonight. All the while, the sea keeps its patient voice at the edge of things. Many of these tales began with a ship and a shore. Many of our days end with that same hush. We follow the sound back to a coast where mountains darken and islands hold their lanterns of stone. Our journey draws near its resting place. And then the first stars lean into the water, and the islands answer with their quiet lights. The oars are shipped. The sea keeps a low silver breath. Far off, a headland wears its crown of pines, and the shoreline goes soft with sleep. Above us, the constellations take their places, old shapes traced by steady hands. The Great Bear turns. The seven sisters draw close. A ship of stars, once called Argo, seems to glide where no wind is needed. And for a moment we travel with it, slow and sure, between dark and gleam. We imagine how these tales began, not in libraries first, but in the smoke of cooking fires and beside the glow of lamps. In courtyards where olives cured and children drowsed. In the open square of a market when the day's bargaining had eased, and voices fell to stories. On beaches where nets dried and sailors compared horizons, under a sky that was both roof and witness. Shared memory moved, from mouth to mouth, shaped by listening ears and thoughtful pauses, meant to be heard beneath the open night. Within those words were beginnings and endings that felt like tides. A world drawn out of hush. A home rebuilt after long wandering. Storms rose and passed. Tempers cooled and hands met again. The loud crash of coral softened into the steady work of living. These stories carried room for grief, yet folded it into seasons, like Persephone's return that follows winter's lean hours. They offered time to consider, to hold a lesson in the mind the way one holds a smooth stone in the palm, turning it until its lines make sense. The gods and heroes walked in places that felt near. They moved past threshing floors and vineyards, along goat tracks and cliff roads, under fig trees and by clear springs. The wonders were close to the familiar. A wind off the bay might be the sign of a god, or simply weather returning to its rounds. A traveler might meet a stranger worth honoring, and the stranger might carry a story that would cross generations. The rhythms were like the seasons themselves, steady and returning, even when thunder rolled or the sea called for courage. Across time, the tales have offered many things. Guidance on how to greet a guest, and how not to let pride grow too tall. Warnings that arrive with a gentle nod. Laughter in the quick wit of messengers, and in the small surprises of the road. Comfort in the steadfast care of a mother, in the fairness of law below the earth, in the warmth of a hearth where Hestia's quiet kept watch. People have carried these voices through years of harvests and winters, through voyages and homecomings, and they have found in them a company fit for night. We feel how they link us to mountains and seas that endure, to islands that still hold their lanterns of stone, to the echo of an ancient song that moves like oars through calm water. The names may grow soft at the edges. New tellers may set the scenes in new rooms. Yet the pulse is familiar. A friendship is saved by kindness. A promise is kept at a crossroads. A crown is set aside for the sake of peace. The old meanings breathe in new ways, and the constellations look down without hurry. So we drift beneath them, letting the long arch of the sky be our canopy. The coast curls away. The fields above the coves fall quiet. If we listen closely, we can imagine the murmur of a marketplace closing, the last notes of a lyre, a storyteller's hand lowering to rest. The sea answers with a patient hush. The ship of stars continues on. And we, carried by these mild waters and these remembered names, follow a path that leads from island to island, from tale to tale, until the night itself gathers us. And then,